The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. All right, welcome back to episode 15 of the CoCo Crew. I am John Linville, and I'm joined by
Neil Blanchard.
And we are the CoCo Crew. This is episode 15, as I said. We are right at 8 months away from the 26th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest coming up in April of 2017. And we are back for another month of talking about CoCo stuff.
It isn't amazing. This is the 15th episode. Well, technically 16th.
16th, really, if you count episode 0. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a fun little thing we've been doing and keep our heads in the community and that sort of stuff. And I think it's been worthwhile. What do you think, Neil?
Well, for sure. Seem to get a lot of positive feedback, which is nice.
Sometimes more than others, but mostly good. Let's see. Well, so what kind of projects have you been working on there lately, Neil?
I am doing another run of the Sega Joypad adapters.
Oh, yeah? They sold out?
Sold right out, and I got a couple requests for them, so I figured, you know what, time to get another batch made up.
Well, that's good. Yeah, and I was noticing the old, I forget who made them, the original Atari joystick adapters.
The Wyco?
The Wyco, that's right. I saw a set of those. Somebody was asking $70 for one. They were brand new, but I don't see how it's any better than what you've got on offer. And
yeah, you don't have the extra button support either.
And it doesn't support the extra buttons, but oh well, can't blame them for trying, I guess, right?
Yep. Is that on eBay?
Yeah, I think that was on eBay. So I'm sure you can find it if you're desperate. I did post. I think I posted a link to that on the Facebook page as well. Let's see, you working on anything else?
No, other than that, no. That's pretty much what I'm focusing on right now. So.
Yeah. Now, I finally did a little blogging and to write up the material for it's really for our tech segment this month, but something I'd been sitting on since, even before CoCo Fest. It just seemed like there was never enough time to quite write it up the way I wanted to, or whatever. Probably still didn't write it up the way I wanted to, but that was getting a receipt printer. Getting code written to hook that into Color Basic so that you could use a modern receipt printer using Color Basics, normal print number -2 or LList commands. I've got both CoCo and MC10 versions of that code, and like I said, published a blog post on it, and talk about it later in the show.
I thought that blog post was really good.
Yeah,
nice read, and it was nice that you included the type-in listings for the software you made. Kind of reminded me of the old Rainbow magazines.
Yeah, pretty funny, yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of cool, fun to work on that. And I thought the basic code is actually kind of tricky, the way it figures out how much RAM you've got and adjusts basic based on that calculation rather than just having to know how much RAM you've got. So I thought that was pretty tricky and make a nice little use of the nice little feature of the implementation of Color Basic. Anyway, so that's pretty cool. I haven't. Other than that, I did manage to clear off part of my desk and a set of CoCo and a small monitor and an MC10 actually for working on that project. But then along with that, I've been loading some games off a tape. And the cable actually reached to my laptop, so I can load software through the cassette interface, but from my laptop, and that works really well for developing code. So I haven't quite got any real coding projects going yet, but I have been loading up some tape software out of my collection to see kind of what works and how some games play that I wasn't already familiar with, and that sort of thing. So still
that's always fun.
Yeah, still haven't quite got back into any new development projects, but having some fun with the CoCo, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well later in the podcast, I think. Anyway, well, so what about eBay or other acquisitions? You got anything that you bought recently?
Yeah. Actually, I'm kind of swimming in Tandy stuff right now.
Oh yeah,
I got a text message from a friend of mine actually a couple of weeks ago, just before I went on vacation, and he said he gave me a heads up that a reuse it store in town here just got a shipment in from an old computer museum.
Yeah.
And, he said, go down there, tell him you know this person. So it's just kind of like a movie, right? So I go down there. I've never been to this place before. And I said, I know this Jeff guy. And they go, oh, no problem. They said, you got to come to the back of the store. Oh, wow. So I get in the back of the store, and I was overwhelmed. I couldn't believe what was there.
And then they beat you to death.
Yeah, I didn't know where I was going. But so I ended up picking up 6 Tandy 1000s.
Wow.
Fully modded CoCo 1 with 64K and a updated keyboard. And a Tandy power switcher. 2 MC10s was in there. Missing the power supplies in the MC10s. I got to figure something out there.
No, it's not too bad.
And then as for eBay, I actually scored a little bit off eBay this month, which is kind of rare. It's been dry for me. And I got 2 CoCo 1s, but what interests me on this auction is one of the CoCo 1s was the white model.
Oh, yeah?
So I put a bid in, and I forgot all about it. It was one of those long listings. It was like a 10-day auction. So I'm on vacation. I get home, and it says, you won this auction. And I'm like, oh, wow. That's kind of a bonus.
I think I might have bid against you on that.
Oh, yeah, you saw that one?
Yeah, I think so. Sorry about that. I bumped you up an extra $5 or something.
Hey, we got to keep the value of these machines up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's cool.
How about yourself?
I haven't really bought a lot of stuff for the CoCo recently, or at least not strictly for the CoCo. I did. I did get a little package of. I had several program packs, and one of which was one that I was missing, which is one of the Spinnaker cartridges. Fraction Fever, I think, is what it was. The other thing I've bought a few of recently is that sometimes I go on a binge, and I like to get these old books, old computer books of different kinds. And in particular, I've been getting ones that were like old books on playing games written in BASIC or whatever. And most of them aren't really very specific to a machine. They're just sort of generic BASIC programs, or maybe they're specific to like Deck Basic or something. But and they're dumb games, like playing NIM or Towers of Hanoi or something like that can be implemented sort of in text mode on any machine running BASIC. But so I've been getting a few of those recently. And checking them out. It's just kind of fun to transport yourself back to the mid 70s and see what amazing adventures awaited for people playing games on computers.
Could probably also give ideas for your own programming too.
Sometimes, some of them, it's more like conceptual games or whatever. But some of them have things like maze generators and whatever else that can be interesting to think about. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how much of the code is really worthwhile, but some of it might be. But anyway, so that's about it. I haven't really got too much actual CoCo stuff in the past month on eBay.
You're going to have to build a really nice bookshelf there sometime at your place.
I already need 3 of them, but I don't have them.
You've got a really impressive library.
Well, they're always mostly in boxes, unfortunately. Oh, well.
Well, hey, at least you got them.
So true, so true. Well, anyway, I think that probably makes a nice introduction for the show. So why don't we take a little break, maybe hear a message from Stevie Stroh or from the CoCo Fest, or whatever you got on tap, and and then we'll be back in a minute with some announcements.
I felt alone and isolated. Sure, email and social media are great, but I wanted something more. Something in real time with real people. I was in a rut with the same old routine. Then my doctor told me about CoCo Fest.
CoCo Fest, held in Lombard, Illinois, is proven to help people break their routine and increase the enjoyment of their computer hobby.
It was important to me that CoCo Fest didn't involve harsh chemicals. The fact that it reduced my feelings of isolation helped get me that confidence to participate in the CoCo community.
Some people had changes in behavior, thinking, mood, innovative and beneficial thoughts or actions during or after CoCo Fest. If you notice any of these, contact others right away. Tell others about any history of mental health improvement, which will likely accelerate while attending CoCo Fest. Use caution when operating vintage computing machinery. Common side effects include trouble sleeping, feelings of anticipation, joystick thumb, and increased levels of vintage computing activity.
I'm very proud. I love myself as a CoCo Fest attendee.
Ask your doctor if CoCo Fest is right for you.
And we're back. Now let's have our standard announcements here. We are the CoCo Crew Podcast. We are available on Twitter as @CoCo Crew Podcast. That's all one word. Check us out. I put some tweets out there from time to time, and sometimes they're informational, sometimes they're just opinionated, but check it out and you can enjoy it just like everyone else. We are available on Facebook. We have a group called the CoCo Crew Podcast. That's 4 words with spaces between them. So I'm sure if you search Facebook for CoCo Crew, I'm sure you'll find it. Come and join us there. And again, we get a lot of announcements there. I usually post there anytime I do a project. Other people do some as well. So we are available, of course, on iTunes. We're available for streaming through Stitcher, and of course for those of you who are using Google Play. So be sure and check us out at those any of those sites. If you're a member at any of those, please feel free to leave a review of the show. That can help other people find the show, and it's always good feedback for us as well. We are a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network is a collection of retro-themed podcasts of a variety of sorts, many of which are technology-themed or retro-technology-themed, including game console podcasts like the Intellivisionaries, or retro computing theme projects like Floppy Days or Antic. But there's also some others that are a little less gaming specific, Retro Obscura, Rediscover the 80s, the Toys R Us Report. That sounds like a fun podcast. Anyway, if you're looking for other 80s era podcasts or podcasts that discuss the 80s era or retro gaming or whatever, be sure to check out the Throwback Network. Similarly, we're a member of the Game by Game podcast, or listed on the Game by Game podcast information hub. These are all pretty much technology-based gaming, retro gaming podcasts. And so if you are of the retro gaming bent, whether it's arcade or home console or home computer, then I definitely recommend that you go and check out the Game by Game podcast information hub. The link is in the show notes. Audio for the CoCo Crew podcast is, of course, hosted by Cyber Ears. If you are a podcast host or someone who has a need to host audio on the internet, do be sure to check out Cyber Ears, where you can have your audio on your terms. If you need to reach out or want to reach out to provide feedback to the CoCo Crew, we have a number of email addresses available for reaching both Neil and I together. You can use show@cococrew.org, podcast@cococrew.org, or feedback@cococrew.org. If for some reason you would prefer to reach just Neil or just me, I can be reached as John, John, @cococrew.org. And Neil can be reached as Neil, Neil, @cococrew.org. So that hopefully that covers our standard announcements. As usual, we'd like to cover a few more announcements of upcoming events of interest to our listeners. The next one on the schedule is the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest number 11. This is scheduled for September 10th through 11th, 2016 at Elk Grove Village, Illinois. I know Neil has been to these in the past and vouches for the wonderfulness of this event. Neil, are you planning to go this year?
Yes, yeah, I got my room booked.
All right.
It's official.
And Neil is vigorously trying to talk me into joining him, and I'm starting to sway. So I may be there as well. So if that affects your travel plans positively or negatively, well, so be it. Coming up after that, we have the Portland Retro Gaming Expo happening October 21st through the 23rd of 2016 at the Oregon Convention Center in Portland, Oregon. This looks like a very interesting event. Definitely have always heard good reviews of this in the past. Includes opportunities for arcade and console gaming, as well as speaking venues for legends of the gaming scene from the past. And, of course, an opportunity for fellowship with other gaming nerds. So if you are in the Pacific Northwest of the United States or somewhere nearby there, I'd heartily recommend that you find your way to Portland on the weekend of October 21st to 23rd. Let's see, coming up after that on Vintage Computer Festival Europa, happening November 19th through 20th, 2016. And this is happening in Switzerland. Of course, the page is being slow to load. That is in Zurich, Switzerland. And, it looks like a cool event. I believe our CoCo friend Tormod Volden is supposed to be there. Hopefully that's not a secret. Hopefully it's correct, and hopefully it's not a secret. If it is a secret, I'm sorry, Tormod. But it looks like a cool event. Like I said, happening in Zurich. If you're in that part of Europe or, in a reasonable distance by train or otherwise, then I would recommend that you find your way there. It will be November. It might be a little cold, but I'm sure it'll be worthwhile. It sounds like a great trip. Still very tempted to go myself, but it seems unlikely at this point. All right. Well, that closes out the year for the events that we have listed, and we do have 3 more on the list for now.
Actually, I was just going to say there's one more we should mention.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Because it does make it in the year. It's World of Commodore, and it's in Toronto, Ontario, Canada here, and they hold it. Basically, what it is, it's easy to remember. It's the first Saturday of every December, and I'm just looking here. It is official. It is going to be running. So Saturday, December 3rd, and Sunday, December 4th, it will be open.
All right.
It's been twice now, and it's actually a good event. It is, obviously heavy Commodore because it's a Commodore event, but I did get to see a paper tape machine running there. So, that was kind of cool.
All right. Well, I will add that to the show notes. That's Saturday, December 3rd through Sunday, December 4th, 2016. Okay. Well, moving on to the most important event on the calendar for us, that is coming up in April the 22nd to 23rd of 2017. That, of course, will be the 26th annual last Chicago CoCo Fest held in Lombard, Illinois at Heron Point Convention Center. You already can make your reservations and get the show rates. Might not be a bad idea to do so because last year we drove enough new attendance with this show, drove enough new attendees to CoCo Fest that they ran out of the first arranged block of discounted rooms. They had to arrange for more. So I don't know. It seemed like a bunch of happy people too. So I suspect many of those people will be heading back. So if you want to get a discount on the room, you might need to act at least earlier than you might anticipate. It is not too early now. Go ahead and make your reservation. And yes, I am trying to take credit for much of that new block of attendees here at the CoCo Crew podcast, because I think we deserve it. Anyway, the CoCo Fest, that is really the main reason the CoCo Crew exists, is to promote CoCo Fest. We love the event. It is a great opportunity for fellowship with other CoCo users. It's a good event for anybody with an interest in retro computing to come out and check out some retro gear, see what people are doing with their retro computing projects, or of course centered around the Tandy Color computer, and come out and exchange a little money for new stuff out of the auction. It is a great event. I cannot speak highly enough of the event. As far as getting you guys to come and show, I think it's a great event. So please come out and join us. I know I'm going to be there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, same here. Wouldn't miss this.
The only question is whether or not Neil and I will travel together.
That was a good journey.
We survived it last year. I don't know if we can do it again, but we'll see. We still got a little time to work that out. But anyway, so that is coming up.
8 months, right? It's not bad. You're almost at the half-year mark.
Almost. Yeah. Okay, and so finishing up, coming up next June 9th through 11th, 2017, will be the Southern Fried Game Room Expo that is held in Atlanta at the Renaissance Atlanta Waverly Hotel and Convention Center. And that is an opportunity to enjoy pinballs and video games and that sort of stuff. And they do have speakers and such as well, as in people that talk. And, of course, have to mention it's already announced for 2017, July 18th through 23rd, 2017, Kansas Fest. Of course, it is an Apple II event, boo Apple. But it is a good event where a bunch of Apple II geeks get together and hang out in a dorm at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri, and enjoy this sweltering heat while they hide in the basement and talk about retro computers and the like. They do have some good presentations there, many of which end up available on the web or on YouTube or whatever. Do check some of them out. They're pretty good. They're even better in person. Tried to talk Neil into going this year, kind of missed out. Maybe I can get him to go that next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. I would like to check that out. It does sound interesting.
Well, it is a good event. I've been once. I would like to go again. Didn't make it this past year, but maybe if I can get a CoCo buddy or 3 to go, then it would be cool. We could stage an invasion the way the Atari guys have been doing.
Maybe we could get the friend of the show. 3 of us can go down.
Maybe so. Well, that probably sums it up for our announcements this month. So we're going to take another little break and entertain you with another word from our sponsors.
You are listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast with Neil Blanchard and John Linville. Like how I switched those names around? I'm the original gamer Stevie Stroh, and I'm a Coco Nut. And if you're a Coco Nut too, then visit I'mACoconut.com for all kinds of cool Coco links, including my YouTube gaming videos. So visit I'mACoconut.com, and long live the Coco. Back to you, Neil and John.
Okay, CoCo Cruisers, now we're back with some news. So kicking off our news segment this time, I have a post from Roger Taylor. Roger Taylor is kind of well known to those who have been around the community a while, although he kind of disappeared for a while. He's shown back up on Facebook in the last year or two. But Roger's big project lately has been an FPGA emulation, or whatever the term is, project, where he wants to build, it started out he's going to build a CoCo, like a CoCo 1 or 2, and then it turned into a CoCo 3, and now he's even calling it a CoCo 4. I guess he's got in mind to add new features beyond the CoCo 3 or whatever. Whether or not that's a good idea, it might be fun. If he's having fun, I'm all for it. Anyway, he's posted a link to, or a a web page that describes his project, or at least how to get involved with his project. Basically, he has a generic FPGA development board called a Thoracic DE0 Nano. And these are available on eBay and probably from other sources that, for a variety of purposes. But the Nano has a couple of pin headers that are there for basically interfacing to the FPGA chip. And so what Roger has done is he's laid out depending on where you're coming from, they might call it a cape or a shield, or I think there's a couple other names for these sort of things. But basically, it's another board that plugs onto the DE0 and gives you some a video port and keyboard port and whatever. And I guess he mounts. Looks like he's got ROM chips on them, whatever. Anyway, so the combination of the FPGA plus his add-on board gives you a CoCo or CoCo-like device, or CoCo 3 or CoCo 4, or whatever you want to call it. It's certainly a CoCo-inspired computer platform. And he's been demonstrating, he has a group on Facebook called CoCo on a Chip that he's been demonstrating his progress over the past few weeks and months as he gets more and more CoCo games running on his CoCo emulated hardware. And he's making pretty good progress. So this would be a competitor to the CoCo 3 FPGA project. I don't know if they need to be antagonistic or not. Maybe they can cross-pollinate at some point. If they are going to add features, I hope maybe they can implement similar feature sets so people can develop to a common hardware standard. I think that would be good. That's been going on. And like I said, Roger Taylor is pretty well known in the community. If you're excited to hear the name Roger Taylor, you may want to go check out what he's been up to. Moving on. So this is not a CoCo project, but I thought it was pretty neat anyway. This is a 6502 emulation project, I guess you could call it. 6502, of course, is the processor in the Apple II and the Atari 8-bits and the Atari 2600 and 5200 and Commodore 64, and basically almost anything, almost any of the home computers except for the CoCo, and with a few exceptions, and the TRS-80s being some of the other exceptions. Anyway, so well-known microprocessor from the 80s era. And this person has kind of gone the opposite direction. Instead of writing a VHDL or whatever to load on an FPGA, this person has taken a number of circuit boards and 74 Logic Series chips and strung them together to implement at least the beginnings of a 6502, or it says he can run the 6502 version of Microsoft Basic, so it must be pretty far along. So it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of hardware emulation projects. It's not quite, it's similar to the Monster 6502 project that we mentioned earlier. This is kind of a step in between. The Monster 6502, I think, actually goes down to using transistors to build up the gates and whatever else, whereas this one is using standard logic chips to build up kind of the logical modules within the 6502. Anyway, I mentioned it to the podcast here because I think you kind of have the right mindset for people to be interested in this sort of project, and it sure would be cool if one of you guys would pick up the same idea and do it as a 6809.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Wouldn't it be awesome to see Color Basic running on a stack of boards sitting on top of a desk? I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right. Well, moving along. So this one is a link from Gamma Sutra, and it really is. It's definitely not a CoCo specific thing. It's not even really a retro computing thing, except it's for a modern game. It's a modern gaming topic. I guess there's a game called 80 Days, and then some other games from the same company, which is called Inkle, I guess. But the games they're producing are essentially they're like modern versions of text-based adventures or text-based games. I think it's a talk, a video. It's a link to a video, and I think the guy even kind of says, well, we're basically like a choose-your-own-adventure novel. Although he kind of says we don't like being compared to that, but that's what it is or something. So anyway, it's a lot like a text-based adventure like Zork or whatever. But they've got this special language called ink. And he goes off and describes how you describe things in ink and how the data structures that you build up relate to one another and whatever. If you're not a computer science or whatever, someone who's interested in computer science, it may not be the talk for you. But I thought it was really interesting, him talking about how their language works and how they use it to solve problems associated with text-based gaming and how their tool chains work and that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in kind of programming or using computers at that level, it's kind of the intersection between where a writer, somebody who writes for humans to read, kind of intersects with somebody who's a programmer who writes, stuff for computers to read. And so what it's like to exist at that little nexus of the universe and what sort of tools are being used there, I think it's a pretty cool video to watch. So anyway, included it in case you're like me and a little interested in weird things. So I think you should check it out. You're going to check that one out, Neil?
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a fan of those text adventure games as well. So
like I said, it's not strictly speaking CoCo, not even anywhere near CoCo, and it's not even retro computing, but it is a modern twist on a text-based adventure. So that might hold some interest for some of the bearded geezers listening to this podcast. All right. So moving along. So this is from the DK Remix group on Facebook. And it says they're happy to announce John, and that's John Kowalski, your Sockmaster, John's latest Donkey Kong project. And he's got Donkey Kong Trainer and Donkey Kong Pace. And so basically, they're kind of versions of Donkey Kong, allow you to kind of change the gameplay in ways to sort of where you can break it down and train to be a better Donkey Kong player by coming into different stages of the game or setting extra hard game play levels and replaying a single screen over and over and over again, that sort of stuff. So apparently the ROMs are available. You can get them for MAME. And sound like you'll even, if you have his DK Remix hardware, which I do, sound like there's a way to get that running on Remix as well. So anyway, if you're a Donkey Kong person, if you're wondering what Sockmaster's been up to, you probably want to go off and check this out.
I wonder if he'll port this to the CoCo version.
Well, not if you don't ask him. The next couple of topics are actually, we mentioned Kansas Fest. We mentioned Kansas Fest 2017 in the announcements. And you may have noticed that from the dates there, the Kansas Fest 2016 has happened just recently. And so there's a few items in our news here that basically originate with Kansas Fest 2016. One of which is a tweet from Quinn Dunkey showing up one of the presentations at Kansas Fest. And this is not her project, I think, but if you look up the Kansas Fest coverage, I think you can figure out who it is. But anyway, emulating a Burroughs 220 on an Apple II. And then she says, if you have to ask why, you are not my people. If you're familiar with Quinn, she's a little outspoken and definitely not ashamed of being a geek. Anyway, so this is a cool project. It's the Burroughs 220. If you get out your Google, you can find out that this was a mini computer from back in the day, maybe even a mainframe computer, a rather large machine, a 50s era computer, so maybe even a mainframe. It was a big iron computer from back in the day. It's basically what it comes down to. And someone's taken upon themselves to write an emulator that emulates this honking beast from the past, and it actually will run on an Apple II. So if you have a need to run 50s era mainframe programs, and you have an Apple II sitting around somewhere, well, you're in luck. So, again, this is the kind of stuff you will see if you ever go to Kansas Fest. You'll see people doing some crazy stuff, even, dare say, maybe perhaps crazier than what you even see at CoCo Fest. And, that can be crazy. CoCo Fest is more fun, though. Trust me. Come and see. All right. So moving along to the next item is from the Lawless Legends team. So Lawless Legends is a pretty neat project coming out of that Apple II, Kansas Fest, whatever community, where they're developing a game engine that's like a role-playing game style of engine. So think, I don't know, Ultima or whatever. For the Apple II, looks really good. Uses the Apple II's high-res graphics mode, and you can kind of walk around, and you get kind of like a top-down view, I think, or no, maybe it's even a first-person view or some stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
And then you can have different cutscenes or whatever. It's kind of interesting because they've actually developed their own language that I don't know if you go. I can't find it right off the top of my head, but they have their own language they've developed that's a little bit higher level for writing code on this, and the code's all available theoretically if somebody would port the higher level language to the CoCo. I don't know if it would just fall out that you could run this stuff, but it'd probably be once you had the language in place, it'd probably be a lot simpler if you wanted to port this to the CoCo 3 or something like that. Anyway, the announcement is they've had this Lawless Legends game in progress for a while, and it's sort of set in an Old West kind of setting, cowboys and stuff. But and they're still not ready to release that this year. But they came out and announced something called Ancient Legends, which I guess is they call it a mini RPG. So it's sort of a scaled down game built on the same engine, and using let's say a picture of a dragon. So you probably have knights and dragons and wizards and that sort of stuff. It's pretty cool. It's running on Apple II. I think there might be a Commodore 64 version coming. So if anybody is an aspiring Apple or a CoCo 3 person that's looking for a big project, well, get on the Lawless Legends stuff. And let's see. Let me see if I can figure out what the name of that language is.
It'd be great to have it on the CoCo 3 platform.
It would be awesome. Plasma. Yeah, so they have this language called Plasma that's it's higher level language. I think it's supposed to be designed in a way that's friendly for execution on the 6502. I suspect anything that's friendly to execute on the 6502 will execute on the 6809 just fine. But, there might be a little bit of back and forth to be had there. But anyway, so I think most of the I think if you want to, whatever you're doing to code up how combat happens or how rooms are navigated or stuff like that, I think is going to be done in Plasma. So anyway, port the Plasma language to the CoCo and then go from there. I think that'd be a good project for somebody to do. I hope somebody will take that up. Anyway, moving along.
So look at that. You listen to our podcast and you got all these project ideas for you.
Yeah, it'd be a great project idea. Speaking of somebody who never seems to need a project idea. So we got Jim Gary. He's announcing a new Dodgem for the MC10. And this is based on the classic for the Atari 2600. So Dodgem for the Atari 2600 is kind of it's sort of a weird racing game where you have these concentric circles of tracks. Not really circles or rectangles or whatever, but imagine a concentric set of raceways, and then you're supposed to traverse all of them, and then you have a racer coming at you in the opposite direction that you're supposed to avoid running into. So anyway, it's kind of a cool little racing game. But he's done it for the MC10. So actually Jim was one of those people I kind of had in mind when I was talking about how I'm collecting up older basic game books or whatever. I think he does something similar. Maybe he looks at old magazines and stuff like that for listings too, but he finds games from the past for written for other platforms, and then he says, I wonder if I can put that on the MC10, and then he does it. So it's kind of like the same idea.
Yeah, it's really cool because it adds to the library of the CoCo, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, in this case, the MZ10, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, he ports a lot of stuff to the CoCo as well, I noticed.
Yeah, a lot of times it makes it to the CoCo as well as the MC10.
Yeah, like he seems to favor the MC10, and then sometimes he'll go over to the CoCo.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. All right, the next item comes from Roland Schweiger. So Rolo, we've talked about him from several times in the past and how he had a CoCo/Dragon multi-cart available, and I guess it's probably still available. So at some point he decided to experiment a bit with this, and I guess he started building adapters so that you can use that multi-cart, and then you can plug it in. It looks like you can plug it in. He's got an adapter where you can plug it into an Odyssey 2 or what do they call it, a video pack, I guess, in Europe. And then so he's got pictures of his CoCo cartridge plugged into this adapter, plugged into the Odyssey, and the Odyssey playing games from it. And then he's got also the same idea. He's got an adapter that plugs into a Vectrix.
Oh, that's cool.
Now, obviously, these the images on these ROMs are going to have to be specific to the Vectrix, so you can't suddenly plug a CoCo game into a Vectrix or a CoCo game into the Odyssey 2 any more than you could plug an Odyssey 2 game into the CoCo. But the hardware is the same, so you could, if you wanted to buy that cartridge from Rolo, you could use that hardware and then store games for the other systems on there as well. And so you have a shared hardware expense that you can spread across other systems besides your CoCo. So, pretty cool idea.
Yeah, I like that. Multi-use.
Yeah, it's multi-use. Like I say, a good way to get a multi-cartridge on those systems as well. Vectrix and Odyssey, I think, have some other options for multi-cartridge, but sometimes those things kind of come and go. So if you don't order them when they're available, you don't get them. So
I've noticed that.
And so, maybe you should order one of these from Rolo, and at least you've got that to tide you over. The next two are really the same item, but they're both from Per Surratt, another dragon guy that we hear from quite a bit on the podcast here. I found in the online website, The Register, earlier in the month, it says seminal adventure game The Hobbit finally ported to the Dragon 64. And so we have this write-up by someone named Simon Sharwood, and talking all about this game, The Hobbit, and how it's finally getting ported to the Dragon 32, and it says it's reportedly the work of a single coder dubbed PSUR1. I said, wait a minute, I know who that is. And so I actually posted about that link to the Facebook group and included a reference to Per, and he chimed in, said he would look at. He wasn't sure, but he'd look at making it available for the CoCo, and we all hope so or whatever. Well, so here we are. Then past few days, we got another post from Per saying, finally, I can share with you the quote, probably final version of the port of the game The Hobbit from Spectrum 48 to 6809 CoCo 2. Program has been tested with these disk operating systems, RS-DOS 1.1, 1.2, 1.2a, so probably will work. Sounds like it has some problems running on a CoCo 3. Sounds like Per is trying to address that. We'll see how well that works out, and hopefully he'll be able to do that so you won't have to have a special version for the CoCo 3 or anything like that. If you're in a position to help Per with that, please do, because I think CoCo 3s are a little hard to come by across the pond there. And so he may or may not actually have one himself. I really don't know. But anyway, it's pretty cool. This old adventure game, like I said, The Hobbit is a pretty well-known Spectrum game from back in the day. taking some work to get that working on the CoCo, or on the Dragon, really. So good stuff, huh?
Yeah, that's excellent. I'm sure that's not easy.
No, takes some dedication for sure. Anytime you do a kind of a hostile port, shall we say, you don't have the source. You have to kind of work from how the game works, or a disassembly or whatever. That gets to be tough. So moving along, I think we mentioned in the earlier podcast that Ed Snyder is working on a cartridge, a ROM cartridge option for the MC10. So we've got three, I guess we've got at least three items here that are all basically the same thing. He posted a picture to the Yahoo MC10 group, which looks like a ROM cartridge, but doesn't look like it has any extras. It's just a ROM cartridge. These ROM cartridges are essentially scaled down versions of the MCX 128 cartridge that has been available for some time, that Darren Atkinson designed, and that Ed has been manufacturing for a while. And so basically he's taken and kind of scaled that. I think he's scaled it down a bit, taken a bit out, or maybe he's enhanced it a bit. I'm not sure. It's not exactly the same, but it's sort of the same general idea. And so anyway, and on this MC10 Yahoo group, he's showing a picture of it. Not a lot of commentary. And then on the TRS-80 MC10 Facebook group, he's showing an enhanced version where he has added a couple of game ports to the cartridge, so that theoretically you could have these joystick ports. It's got a sound chip as well added, I think, so that you could have a game with enhanced sound and joystick controls on the MC10. And later in that thread there, it shows some pictures of boards there. And then a bit later, still almost 2 weeks ago now, he sends an email to the mailing list announcing that he's got his board assembled. I think it's one of the earlier boards that he's dealing with here, but so not one with the game controllers. I could be wrong, but he's got a board assembled, and he's taken Flag and Bird and Space Assault, which were ported to the MC10 by Darren Atkinson. And so he's taken and added a menu system, and he has a cartridge you can plug into the MC10 and then choose whether you're going to run Flag and Bird or Space Assault. So those are interesting in and of themselves, because those were CoCo games that, as I understand it, Darren has taken and disassembled them and sort of directly ported them to the 6803 code for the MC10, based solely on the disassembled 6809 code. So also interesting projects there.
That really caught my eye when he posted that up. I couldn't believe it. Even seeing that loader, that looked neat.
Yeah. So pretty cool. I think to some degree this is a project sort of to prove it can be done more than anything. I'm not sure it's 100% practical because of the amount of extra hardware you need. But maybe if you have a set of programs ready to run from ROM that could be collected and put on a cartridge, maybe at least at some point then you'd have a more practical device for the MC10. But, I mean, what is practical? None of this is practical, right? It's all what you enjoy. So I don't mean to dissuade anyone or so if using a board like that on your MC10 sounds exciting to you, then more power to you. Go off and do something, and then send me a note about what you did so I can talk about it. Right, Neil?
Makes retro computing interesting.
That's right. That's right. Okay, one more from Ed Snyder, aka Zipster. Somebody was inquiring on the CoCo mailing list about buying an Orchestra 90 cartridge. That, of course, is the stereo music output cartridge for the CoCo. That's the hardware is essentially just two DACs, or digital to analog converters that take 8-bit samples and basically directly connect them to two speakers. And then the Orchestra 90 cartridge then also includes an EEPROM or a ROM with some software. It's some very cool software on it that will turn musical notations into the samples to drive those stereo outputs. So anyway,
and you did a tech segment on that.
I did a tech segment on that, yes. But so anyway, the hardware there is really not that difficult. And so Ed's taken that project and kind of re-implemented it. And say not that complicated. I don't know how difficult it is. Let's put it that way. The hardware design is not that complicated. So Ed was able to take and implement that with some FP or CPLD, and some extra bits here and there, I'm sure. And he's prototyped out the design, and I think this is when he announced that he had prototyped it, and then later came back, and where he's been successful at cloning the design, and interestingly enough, he's using these nifty little red injection molded cartridge cases. That's one cool thing about his design, especially with the use of the CPLD. He was able to cut down on the hardware footprint quite a bit, so it fits the short cartridge case. Can run the code that drives this hardware, and he took the code that the Orchestra 90 code that'll work on the Dragon, and he's got a switch on the device. He can switch between the Dragon code and the CoCo code, so that you can use the device in either a Dragon or a CoCo. So pretty cool stuff. I don't think it's available for sale to any of us normal folks yet. But if you're looking for an Orchestra 90 cartridge and have had trouble or can't swallow the price on eBay, Zipster might be running to your rescue before long.
You don't see many on eBay these days.
They pop up from time to time. It kind of depends. I don't know. They're pretty cool cartridges. I actually have used one to drive an oscilloscope in XY mode to do graphics, which I think is a cool project.
Nice.
Moving on, we have a request from Aaron Wolf. He sent to the CoCo mailing list. It was about Conway's Game of Life. It says he's looking for a Rainbow article that implements the Game of Life in BASIC. He's pretty sure he read it as a kid. Was Googling around, had some trouble finding it. I think later in the thread, somebody did point it out for him. Yeah, it says Robert Galt wrote back, I believe you want The Meaning of Life by William Barden, good old Bill Barden. The Rainbow, June 86, page 196 to 205. That's kind of cool. So the Game of Life is kind of this weird computer science-y thing based on a principle called cellular automata, which is kind of a freaky cellular automaton. I think automata is the plural. Anyway, it's kind of a freaky computer science concept. Basically is where you have a set of items that they change over time, or kind of the next state of the items is sort of based on a calculation that happens at each of the individual items based on the current state and the state of the items around them. And the most famous implementation of this is something called the Game of Life, which was produced by a mathematician, a British mathematician, John Horton Conway, in 1970. So the thing is you set up these rules about, how many cells. If a given cell is alive or dead, and then how many cells around it are alive or dead, kind of together determine whether or not in the next round that cell will be alive or dead. And then usually represent this in the graphics with, a on or off kind of state. And it turns out you can do some really cool stuff with that. You can produce combinations of shapes that will then self-replicate, or they'll travel across the screen and maintain in essentially the same shape or a set of shapes. Sometimes they'll spawn off new things, whatever. I don't know. It's kind of a game only a geek can love. But a lot of geeks have loved it or do love it. I know Aaron is quite the geek from time to time, so he probably does love it. we love you, Aaron. Anyway, again, later in the podcast, we might add a bit to this discussion. So stay tuned and listen up. But anyway, so Aaron was asking about the game of life, and it sounds like you found it. Something to talk about, huh? All right. Where are we?
Fort Worth Library.
Yeah. So what happened at the Fort Worth Library, or what's significant about the Fort Worth Library?
The Fort Worth Library is actually the home of the Tandy Corporate Archives.
How about that?
Gravulik posted on the Facebook group that he went there and checked it out.
How about that? It's kind of cool. It sounds like there's a lot of good information possibly available there. It'd be nice if somebody could audit that information and at least give us a number on how many CoCos were sold. But anyway, well, that was kind of cool, and never would have really even thought that, there's a library somewhere with Tandy Corporate Archives. But I guess there is, huh?
It definitely makes you want to go check it out.
Yeah, so that's pretty neat. Well, so what else have we heard from Eric these days?
Yeah, and Eric also posted, which was an interesting post, that him and Greg Miller, they both wrote Color Max Deluxe back in the day. They released the source code for it.
Yes, very cool, very exciting. It's a landmark CoCo 3 project or program back in the day. The kind of thing people would cite, said, yeah, we used to have this thing and it's pretty cool. And it's cool to finally have that available to the public. If I don't know if there's any outstanding bugs or interesting features or whatever that somebody might want to try to learn about or fix or whatever in there. But you have the code now. You can look at it if you're interested. And see, it says it's 27,774 lines of 6809 assembly.
Wow.
Says the original Mac Paint, which is, kind of the same type of application, consisted of 5,804 lines of Pascal code, augmented by another 2,738 lines of 68,000 assembly language. Eric, of course, asserts that the 6809 assembly will outperform the Mac in most operations. So could be some cool code in there. It sounds like a big piece of code to read, but it might be cool to do, huh?
For sure. And one thing I could think of would be nice to add in there is the that new high-res driver.
Oh, yeah, for the mouse.
Yeah, I get that, because then you won't need the high-res pack.
That could be cool. So also in this discussion, somewhere in there, Eric mentions that you could take the output from the program and feed it to a CGP 220 emulator. And so Barry Nelson kind of took the bait and said, what emulator are you talking about? And turns out Eric has an emulator for the CGP 220 also available, written in Python. So you can feed it the printer codes that would go to a CGP 220, and it'll produce a graphic file for you that would approximate what would have shown up on the CGP 220. So that's a pretty cool project too, huh?
Well, without ink, that's your best bet.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to get ink for the CGP 220 these days, huh?
Yeah.
Back to more retro goodness with the CoCo Crew.
So, all right. Well, moving on to the next one, we have Joel Huey. It must be Huey, wouldn't you think? Joel, if I'm mispronouncing your name, please let me know. Joel Huey writes in, says he's demonstrating, quote, 80s Wi-Fi at the Wichita Mini Maker Fair. Probably a lot of places have had these mini maker fairs around. They're kind of like craft fairs, but for geeks to come out and show, not even necessarily geeks, but for people who make stuff and could be computer stuff or electronic stuff, or it could be glass blowing or blacksmithing or any number of things. So we have a local mini maker fair here in the Burlington, North Carolina area, and we certainly have all of those things, even down to people who knit with recycled plastic bags and people who blow glass, and we have, of course, ham radio guys, and we have any number of different kinds of people who fit under the moniker of maker. So Joel went and put on apparently a retro computing display. And so what do you mean by 80s Wi-Fi? So so he apparently has a what's it, AM, FM? I guess he has an FM transmitter like you used to play MP3s in the car, or at least you used to before cars started coming with the aux ports. So if you remember, you could tune to a certain FM station and plug this device into your iPod and play your iPod over the radio, right? So he has a device like that, and he hooked it up, the FM receiver at the other end, he hooked up the CoCo's cassette cable to hook to the receiver side, and then used the FM transmitter to play an MP3 or wave probably of a CoCo program over the FM transmitter. Awesome. and then was able to just C-load or C-load in the program at the other end. So that's kind of cool. It's sort of the wireless equivalent of one of those Tandy TRS-80 network boxes that was really just a collection of cassette port cable multiplexers. And so it's like you said, it's sort of the wireless version of that over FM radio. Anyway, a pretty cool project. Theoretically, I guess back in the day, well, in fact, I think over in in the UK, they did something similar to that for transmitting programs on the BBC out to BBC Micro or Spectrum users or something. Maybe some other places in Europe as well, where they played, the Devil's Screech over the over the radio, and people were able to copy programs that way. So pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it's neat that can be done.
Yeah. So, well, the next one in particular, left me a little sad. I mean, talking about someone who's not quite advanced age, but someone who's certainly lived a long life. But still, it's a little sad to hear of somebody who was a bit of a hero of my youth passing away. And this is Seymour Papert. Papert, I think it's Papert is the way I've heard it pronounced, but it looks of French origin, so I have no idea how it's supposed to be pronounced. Anyway, Seymour worked at the MIT Massachusetts Institute of Technology and was one of the creators of the Logo programming language. And as I may have mentioned before, Logo was actually the first computer language I ever dealt with, of course, running on the Apple II in school, but still, I think a number of us have used Logo on one time or another, either on the CoCo or some other retro computer. This was an attempt to reach out and teach computer programming to children. And for me, it worked and made all the difference in the world to my career potential and my possibilities for life and education and whatever. And so Mr. Papert or Dr. Papert certainly instrumental in that, and sad to hear that he's passed on. I actually was sad to hear that he had been involved in a motorcycle accident some years before that had, changed him for the worst for a number of years before his final passing. This is kind of a reminder that while we do still have some people who were there at the kind of in this instrumental time that put a lot of us on the road to technology or whatever, we're losing them every day. And so we should probably make more effort to talk to these people and get their stories. And I think we're going to try to do our part here on the podcast over the next few episodes. Anyway, if you ever used a Logo programming language, make the turtle move around the screen. The guy who was behind that has gone on to his reward. So we'll just speak of him in memory here, Seymour Papert. Now, along those lines, for some reason, Amazon has started recommending to me a game called Robot Turtles. And this is a board game. So literally, cardboard, playing surface with cards and tokens and such for moving around it. And I guess the movement is done through some programming cards with instructions like, forward to and left and right and whatever. And I think there might be some other instructions for clearing obstacles or whatever. Clearly, it's inspired by kind of the turtle graphics sort of programming from the Logo programming language. And, in fact, it says it's inspired by the Logo programming language. I don't think this has any direct connection with Seymour Papert, but Could be wrong, but anyway, if you're looking for a way to reach out to kids, and many of us in the retro computing hobby talk often about how we want to reach out to kids and teach them more about technology, this might be a way for you. Looks like it's selling for less than $20 on Amazon. So it's the Robot Turtles game. So you may want to check that out. I'm in no way affiliated with any of this, with Think Fun or anything else, so I don't get any of the money. So just so you know, if you want to send me money, go ahead and send me an email and I'll help you arrange it. Next on the list, we have a kind of a neat project. This is not a CoCo project at all, but it is TRS-80.
It's Tandy Family.
The Tandy Family. So this is from Peter Statinsky. If you listen to our crossover episode with the Trash Talkers, you should recognize Peter's name or his voice. I think he has a distinctive voice. He's not going to be speaking here, but anyway, Peter has. So you may have heard of a project for the Model 1 and now the Model 3 TRS-80s called the MIS for the Model 1, and now I think they pronounce it Mies because 3 kind of looks like an E. The Model 3 SE, Model 1 SE. Anyway, those are kind of add-on super boards or whatever you add on, and they have networking and storage and whatever else to kind of turn the original TRS-80s into these kind of, I don't know, Frankenbeast computers or whatever that can hook up to the internet and do wild stuff or whatever, right? And so one of the features that they have there, I guess he wrote a program called TRS Box that uses the networking features of the MIS or the Mies to actually let you access a Dropbox account from your TRS-80. Fine. Well, so now I guess he's got a version of the TRS Box program that, along with a less complicated serial IP adapter, which you can pick up from eBay or wherever else. These are pretty simple devices that basically just give you access to a telnet style configuration where you kind of act like you're talking to a serial port, and it just reaches out across the network to make it a single TCP connection. If you have one of these devices and you can hook it up to your TRS-80 Model 1 or 3, then looks like this is actually for Model 3 or 4 specifically, then this TRS Box program will let you access a Dropbox account from your TRS-80, now just using that device instead of having a MIS or Mies. So it's a cool project. It's not CoCo at all, but I mention it because it's the kind of project that a CoCo could do. And so if you're looking for a project, if you have an interest in Dropbox, and if you know to write a little code to talk over a TCP streaming connection, then you could do this project on a CoCo. So I'd love to see it. I hope somebody will. And if you do,
I'd like to see that too.
If you do, write us about it, huh? The next link is may seem a little strange. It's an interview with Claudio Richter by Daniel Campos. Daniel is a Brazilian CoCo fan. He deals with the various Brazilian clones of the CoCo. And so here, this is an article it's written in Portuguese, but Google Translate will do a fairly reasonable job for you if you let it translate the Portuguese to English. And you can see him interview Claudio about the creation of this CD6809 CoCo clone, what that was like back in the day. So it's a pretty interesting article. Like I said, you have to do the translate, and Google Translate it's not 100%. You have to read between the lines a little bit, but, it's not a bad article. So if that appeals to you, or if you happen to speak Portuguese, so much the better. There you go. So it's a cool little addition to our shared history. Huh? Did you read it, Neil?
I haven't checked it out yet, but I'll definitely check it out.
Are you going to read it in the original Portuguese?
I wish I could. But I'm going to be relying on the Google Translate.
Yeah.
It's nice we can do that now.
It is kind of amazing. We live in a bit of a golden age, don't we?
Yeah.
All right. So this one may seem a little random at first, but this is an email message. It comes from Kip Kuhn on the CoCo mailing list. It says he's looking for the source code to Motorola's Microchroma 68 TV bug monitor program. He's looking for it in assembly source code form. And so he says he's looking possibly to create a clone of the Microchroma 68 from scratch. So why I'm included this one because I probably have one of the few Microchroma 68 machines actually still available and running. And I responded to that effect that I had that, and also that I knew where somebody had already had the code that they had typed in or whatever. It's available. It actually was on a APF Imagination Machine Yahoo group, if I'm not mistaken, which is a little weird, but that APF machine uses a 6800 processor, which is more or less the same kind of processor that's on the Microchroma 68, and someone there was looking for source for a monitor, a program, and so one way or another got pointed to for that as an example. But anyway, I think I've mentioned these boards from time to time on the podcast here. This is the 6808 CPU, has a 6847 video chip, so it's kind of related to the CoCo. In some ways, it's almost maybe in some ways more closely related to the MC10. But I built one. I was able to acquire a kit from John DeMoss, who was the author of the TV Bug Monitor program, and he had gotten a kit when he worked as part of that team. I eventually convinced him to sell me the kit. So I actually got an unassembled kit and down to the bare PCB, and it came with some of basically the key ICs, but there was a lot I had to assemble from parts. I had to actually collect the parts. But I built it up as part of a Retro Challenge task or whatever quite some time back, and got it to run or whatever. It's cool. Anyway, so I mentioned it partly so I could talk about my Microchroma 68. Partly so, like I said, Kip's out there. I told him where to get the stuff. I didn't see a response. I don't know if he saw it or not. If you didn't see it, Kip, feel free to ping me again. I can find it again for you. If you have a Microchroma 68, if you as a listener have one, I would love to hear from you. There's I think one other person out in the world that I know of that says he has one that has contacted me a couple of times. I'm not sure if his is running or not, but just kind of a sort of an exclusive club. There's not that many of them out there.
That's a rare item now.
If we knew there were 5 people out there with one, maybe I'd pour Farfall to it. Anyway.
Jim said he has one.
Well, he does. Yeah, he has a kit or whatever. If I'm not mistaken, his kit is incomplete. Okay. I think he's missing a rather key chip. It's a chip that's both a ROM and it's a ROM IO timer kind of chip where it's got both a burned ROM or a mask ROM in the chip, along with IO ports and such, and a timer. I think you could probably create something, create a small circuit board that would more or less replace it. You probably would still have to change the code a little bit. I don't know. If Jim wants to build one, I'd be happy to try to help him out. But anyway, that's there's not many of them else around there. I think, like I said, I think Jim's kit might be missing a key component. So anyway,
those components aren't easy to source.
That's pretty much damn impossible. If you found one, it's almost by pure luck at this point. But like I said, I happen to have one. I'm glad mine's working. There are similar chips out there where you could string like 3 or 4 chips together and get the same effect, but which might be what you'd have to do. Well, let's move on. We have a couple of sort of related articles here from the Nerdly Pleasures blog site. I'm not sure who the person is behind Nerdly Pleasures. If anybody knows, let me know. Just out of curiosity, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting site.
This first one actually mentions the Sega joypad adapters that I designed and that Neil's been producing. And it's kind of a review of them. In his review, at one point he says it seems a little expensive, but then he goes on to say that he kind of built his own adapter based on the same circuit and spent about as much money. So I was like, well, that's sort of the point, right? Save a little money by at least letting somebody else do the work, right? Anyway, I didn't think it was unfriendly. I thought it was reasonably fair. Mentions that it's the same hardware. The joysticks on the Tandy 1000 work the same way as the CoCo, and they use the same connectors and everything. And so, should be able to use the same adapter on a Tandy 1000. You won't have the button switching available unless you make up a connector that does something about the serial port connection. But you could use them on the Tandy 1000 for just the 2-button support.
Yeah, for the actual joysticks, that'll work for that.
Yep. Anyway, so that's cool. And then the next article, or maybe a couple articles, anyway, also from Nerdly Pleasures. There's an article also talking about the Tandy 1000 joysticks, sort of lamenting the difficulty of finding them, and how it's easier to find normal PC joysticks. The problem being is that PC joysticks are read using an RC charge circuit, whereas the Tandy 1000 and CoCo joysticks are read using a voltage divider circuit. And so they're slightly different, just different enough that they're not going to work, right? But he proposes a mini hack that you could put in on your PC style joysticks, and in most cases you could probably even make them switchable or certainly be reversible. But anyway, you're generally going to have a 3-terminal potentiometer in there. And so on the PC, you're going to have just 2 of the terminals hooked up to one of the ends, and then the center wipe terminal. And as the wipe changes, that changes the overall resistance that then feeds into a RC charging circuit, resistor capacitor charging circuit. So the unknown resistance and the known capacitance is going to charge a certain amount of time based on the time that it takes. You can determine the unknown resistance. That's me sounding smart. Anyway, if you change that circuit so that instead of using just 2 terminals, if you take that 3rd terminal that's kind of just hanging in the air and wire it to ground, you basically have turned that variable resistor into a voltage divider, a variable voltage divider. So basically you've made the PC style joystick now into a Tandy 1000 or CoCo style joystick. It's a pretty simple little hack. So now with that and a connector replacement, you can basically use any PC joystick with the CoCo. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Nerdly Pleasures.
Gives you another joystick avenue.
That's right. Okay. So the next couple of items come from Jason Lee Steer, a talented hardware hacker coming out of Australia. Is that correct? Australia? I think that's right.
That's right, yep.
And so he's showing a couple of examples of things he's been working on. One is a SRAM memory upgrade board for some of the later CoCo 2s that have connectors on the motherboard for just such an upgrade board. And so he's been working on that. And then
that's a nice looking board.
Yeah,
I was checking that out.
It's nice and to have, and it's an easy upgrade. And I think he's got something similar in place for some of the e-board CoCo 1s, which are some of the older CoCo 1s. I don't see a picture of that, but sounds kind of cool. But then I think the thing of biggest interest here is he's making some real progress on a CoCo MIDI board. MIDI MIDI. What does MIDI stand for? It's of course a digital MIDI music standard used for plugging together synthesizers and keyboards and stuff. And it's short for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So there's a design for a MIDI board for the CoCo. There's a couple of different people who produced it, but they're all basically the same design, is my understanding. And it's a 6850 serial UART chip. The MIDI interface is basically a serial port running at a kind of a strange speed and with some different electrical characteristics than, say, an RS-232 serial port. But anyway, so he's got a design, and he's got a couple of different versions of the board. He's got a 1.0 board that has to have a few flying wire style of modifications, and then a 1.1 board. So he's had some other posts kind of suggest that people are buying the 1.1 boards, and he's assuring people that the 1.0 boards are electrically the same, and that his patches are applied in a very nice way. So if you're interested in a CoCo MIDI board, I encourage you to go ahead and buy the 1.0 boards. He's giving you a little bit of a price break on them, and I'm sure they will work just as well. So anyway, do you do much MIDI stuff, Neil?
No, I haven't actually. But it's always interests me because I have some DJ, the virtual turntable decks here, and they actually do support MIDI. And I always thought to myself, that'd be a really cool project to get the CoCo interface to those DJ decks.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some cool stuff there, some cool music available, the synthesizers and whatever. You know, the MIDI protocol by itself is not much different than like sheet music. You know, it doesn't really specify the sound of the music so much as it specifies the flow of the music.
Right.
And so you kind of have to assign the channels to specific instruments and such.
Well, the other cool thing with MIDI is it can actually control devices too.
Right. And so like you can hook up your keyboard or, you know, other stuff like that. So that's kind of cool. So anyway, if you're looking for a MIDI board, they're a little hard to find in the community. I think I have one. Don't think I have more than one. I think I have at least one, but you know, it sounds like there's going to be a few more available now. So contact Jason and see if you can get one.
You ever use yours?
I don't think I've ever actually used the CoCo one. I've experimented some with MIDI, sort of in a general sense, to kind of get a feel for how it really works or whatever.
Right.
Because it was a bit of a mystery to me at one point. But I have like a MIDI interface that's a USB or something I was able to plug into my Linux box and deal with some stuff. Moving on, so we have a friend of the show, Steve Strobridge, or the original gamer Stevie Stro, or OG Stevie Stro. Steve is real nice. He runs ads for the CoCo Crew on a lot of his videos, maybe all of his videos. You know, he's been a real positive influence on the show and a nice person to deal with, a good person in the community, very enthusiastic about the community since he's been around the past year or so. Steve's YouTube channel just recently crossed 1,000 subscribers. I think he's at 1,056 now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So very exciting. That is in the range of how many downloads we're getting on our episodes. So I don't know if that's a total 1-to-1, viewership between the two or not, but you know, one way or another, I congratulate Steve on having that extra number of subscribers, or that landmark number, and I hope his success continues. You know, moving on.
It's going to be his 1 year mark.
Yeah, it's about, well, I'm not sure how long he was doing videos before we discovered him, but it's about a year since we discovered him.
yeah, for the CoCo scene.
Yeah. So also, speaking of Mr. Strobridge, he did post a link to the Color Computer group for a computer programming language that's out there called QB64. And QB64 is essentially it's a free and open source implementation of basically of the old Quick Basic programming language, which is a Microsoft Basic that ran on the PC. If you're familiar with if you're familiar with Color Basic, or if you're familiar probably with AppleSoft Basic on the Apple II, or in many ways the Commodore Basics, I'm sure if you'll find this QBasic or this QB64 very familiar to deal with for writing most programs. Anyway, this project's still out there, and it's maintained, and it supports I'm pretty sure it supports Linux, certainly Windows. I think it supports Mac even. It runs on Windows, XP, Vista. Let's see. Yeah, there's Linux, Mac OS X. There's even an Android version.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, Steve kind of gives it his thumbs up. It sounds like he used QBasic for DOS for some period of time in the past. And he seems to think this is a cool thing. So if you're a reforming BASIC programmer or maybe even a non-repentant BASIC programmer, you may want to check out QB64 to extend your range of coding to more modern platforms. All right, very cool. Moving on, getting close to the end of the news segment here. Hopefully I'll make it. So moving on, we have an article that made its way to Adafruit. Adafruit is a kind of well-known sort of maker-oriented site that runs a variety of electronics projects, postings, or whatever, and apparently they do at least a certain amount of retro computing stuff too. So Bart Vandenacker, who goes by the name of Retro Guy, has managed to get an article posted there to Adafruit where he'd acquired a CoCo 3 and sort of had some problems, and so he did a tear down and had to repair some stuff on the keyboard and whatever else. It's got a video posted. Not a lot of color computer 3s that have made their way to Europe, so I think that made it a little bit interesting for him. As maybe something that he had not seen a lot of. Anyway, posting on Adafruit, that's good for the community. It makes people aware of that there are some crazy CoCo people still out here. so that's good. So thanks, Bart, for getting that publicity for the community. So the next item is something I just happened to pick up on another podcast, and wasn't quite sure I'd heard it correctly at first. But so this is something called Atom Busmon, and so Atom. I think this Atom is in Acorn Atom, which is a machine like the CoCo that used the 6847 video display generator, although it used the 6502 central processor.
We won't hold that against it.
Yeah, we won't hold that against it. Anyway, the Atom folks have a lot of very clever developers over there, both in the hardware and software space. And so this project uses a hardware device called I'm not sure how it's pronounced, Godil, Godil, all capitals. And what the Godil is an FPGA, possibly CPLD, if you're picky about the difference. It's a programmable logic device, or perhaps a collection of them, because it looks like there's more than one chip there, although it might just be memory. Looks like a Xilinx device. Yeah, it says a Xilinx FPGA module. Anyway, these are crammed onto a small circuit board that has the same footprint, with the pins installed at least, as a 40-pin, well, it says DIL package, but it appears to be the same as a 40-pin DIP. And 40-pin DIP, of course, is the footprint of both the 6809 and the 6847. I think it also was for the 6502 and maybe the Z80. That was sort of the big chip du jour back in the day. That was sort of the main package size at one point. So this Godil device, it looks like you can sell it or buy it for a little bit more than $50. And then this project, this Atom Busmon, has it's essentially an in-circuit emulator, which means it's a device that will run in circuit, and you can load it up to either act as a 6502 or a 6809 or a Z80, and then plug it into your computer that uses one of those processors, and then you can do debugging at the hardware level. So that's pretty cool if you're badass enough to use it. Now, I'd heard of this module before, also in terms of the Atom, because I think they also use this same hardware device for to do a kind of a similar project for the 6847, where they do a drop-in replacement for the video chip, and then I think they're able to do VGA output from it. Same hardware, just a different job. So anyway, it's pretty cool shit. They show it working with a BBC Micro machine. It looks like some pretty cool stuff. And this in-circuit emulator is the kind of thing that I've used professionally doing board bring up on Linux or other operating systems, to make just a dead PCB start to come to life. So it's pretty high-tech stuff. Anyway, I am curious. I don't know, where their 6809 code implementation comes from. I wonder if it's the same as what's being used in the RFPGA projects, or if they've got something else. If they do, I wonder if it's any better at cycle accuracy than what's being used in the CoCo 3 FPGA, or I don't know. It might be interesting to find that out.
Yeah, it would be, because it does show they support 6809 here.
Yeah. So pretty cool stuff. I don't know if anybody has a need for an in-circuit emulation of the 6809, but it might be worth checking out.
I don't know how you found that one.
Yeah, I just heard it go by on one of the other podcasts, maybe Retro Computing Roundtable. I'm not sure, but I'm sure somebody tipped somebody else off. All right, so here's one from Brett Gordon. This is actually a link to a tweet on that Twitter thing. And this is Brett. He mentioned before he was working on the IP networking on a CoCo within his Fuzzix operating system. I'm irritating Brett by still giving all the different pronunciations, because he reminded me that there at one time was an ongoing joke or whatever about how to pronounce Linux or Linux, and I'm sure he should be aware that I would be aware of such things. But anyway, I think I had him wondering a bit. Anyway, I'm going to continue to poke a little fun at Fuzzix. Anyway, Brett says he's BBSing with Fuzzix plus the micro IP native stack on a Tandy CoCo 3. So it sounds like he's having some success in doing IP networking on a CoCo 3, actually running code, not just using some add-on device or whatever. So that sounds pretty exciting. I hope that he continues. I'm interested to see that running at next year's CoCo Fest, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to see that.
So very cool. Keep up the good work, Brett. I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, Brett, he gets into some interesting projects. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. Okay. So here's one that's a little odd, and I almost didn't include it. So it's a link to an article on something called Red Parsley, which I don't know much about. Red Parsley. It says for all things retro gaming and more besides. So whatever. It's a blog. But the article is Input Magazine, a retrospective. Well, I'd never heard of Input Magazine. Have you, Neil?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So we'll just start with what he says. Input Magazine was a computer programming course published as a part work by Marshall Cavendish in 1984-5. So let me translate some of that. So Marshall Cavendish was a magazine publisher. It seems like they maybe were primarily in the UK. I'm not sure, but definitely at least in the UK. And when it says a part work, I'm not 100% sure what that means, but what I'm reading between the lines is that, these were sent out like inserts, maybe in other magazines or whatever. Once in a while you have a magazine that'll have like an insert that has its own page numbering and everything. You've probably seen that, right?
Right.
So it sounds like there's one of these kind of situations where they did 52 of these, presumably one a week. I don't know if that was like in a weekly magazine or whatever. And within them, the page numbering is consistent across all 52, so that, like page 57 is in, a certain issue. There's not 3 page 57s. You know what I'm saying? And so, if you read this article a little bit more, it'll describe that it does. It's kind of a generic programming course concentrating on BASIC. It has some assembly language stuff or whatever, with examples for a variety of microcomputers of the age. right? And that includes the Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum, the Acorn Electron, the BBC Micro, Commodore 64 and 128, the VIC-20, the ZX81, the Dragon 32 and 64, and of course the Tandy Color computer. So if you read the article, it kind of makes it sound like, and to extent it's true, there's kind of two tiers of computers supported in here, right? And it makes it sound like that somehow the Dragon is in the top tier of computers supported, but that the color computer is not, right? Now, that sounded a little funny to me since they're pretty damn similar.
Right.
But it might be true at some level. It might be somewhere in here where there's something that they've used some basic statement that possibly is not implemented on the CoCo, or maybe is only implemented in extended basic on the CoCo, but is in normal basic on the Dragon or something like that. I don't know. Right. It's possible. But I've started looking at these and started printing them out and looking at the code examples, and they're pretty good. And they've got some pretty decent examples of basic usage and pretty decent examples of you drawing graphics and whatever else. And there's some, they go into some assembly language examples. Even beyond that, so I've got a color laser printer here at the house, and I've started printing some of these out, and it's just beautiful artwork inside here, and it is sort of garish, 80s-ish, lots of color. Not really hurt your eyes. The colors are nice; they go together, but there is a lot of color there that, it kind of puts it in that time period of the 80s. It looks like a kid book from the 80s in many ways, and of course that's exactly what it is. But it's very colorful. But it doesn't, it's sort of written kind of at that right level where it doesn't talk down to you, but it,
I was just going to information. I was just going to ask that. So somebody coming, that has no programming knowledge at all, is this a good way to learn?
I think it might be. Now it's like I said, there's 52 of these issues. And I think altogether each one is about 30 or 40 pages. I think altogether they print out to about 1,600 pages. Wow. So it's pretty big if you want to print it all out.
Yeah.
Pretty big if you want to read all of it, for that matter. The good news is all 52 issues are available on archive.org, so you don't have to hunt them down on eBay.
Oh, that's awesome.
You can get them and you can print them out. If you have a nice laser printer, you can get some pretty good printouts at home. I've printed out about 6 or 7 of them. Stack's getting a little high, so I got to figure out what I'm going to do with them. Punch a hole in them and put them in a binder or something. It's pretty good information. I'm very impressed. I don't know much about Marshall Cavendish. I certainly had never heard of Input before. No, but, it's lots of kind of type in basic kind of game stuff. But there's explanations of different basic commands and what they're used for. There's some example programs that are games, and I think there's some example programs that are, more like keeping records of your record collection and stuff like that, which at least has some utility to it, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was a little skeptical when I read this initial article, but I did go on to check it out and look at some of the stuff, and I was really impressed. And like I said, it's visually appealing. There's lots of nice color. The technical level is kind of at a comfortable level, where it, like I said, it doesn't treat you like an idiot, but it also, it doesn't, it's not above you either. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Like it's not too basic.
Right. It's not totally stupid, and you don't need a degree to understand it either. So sort of at a smart kid level is what I would say. So I think it's a pretty good magazine. So I've included it here. You should go and check it out. And if you're the kind that likes to print out stuff from the past and read through it, well, print out a few of these. Check them out.
Yeah. I think I'm going to do that myself, actually.
Oh, and like I said, as far as I can tell, what they were talking about before is like not everything that runs on the Commodore 64 is going to run on the VIC-20. Not everything that runs on the ZX Spectrum is going to run on the ZX81. But pretty much from what I've seen, everything that's there for the Dragon, it's there for the Tandy Color computer as well. So
that's perfect.
Not surprising. So pretty good stuff. And if you are a Dragon user, then you don't even have to worry about that, right? So go and check them out. And like I said, you can find them on archive.org. Very exciting stuff. Okay, well, so our last news item of the month. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm definitely ready.
Do you want to cover it?
Yeah, I'm going to cover this one. I've been waiting for this for a long time, and I'm definitely excited it's announced. Nick Morentis announced, I think it was last week. The funny thing is, he announced it when I was away on vacation, that his Popstar Pilot game is ready for pre-order. So it's now available to, you can, order it and guarantee your copy. And the package is really nice. He's including onto a CD or a DVD disc. I'm not sure what media, but optical. And he's got a nice case for it. It shows. And he's also including a back catalog of all his previous games. So
I thought that was nice.
Yeah, that's really nice because, there might be some games there that, you never got to play and you can check them out. It says $25 for the package. Includes the shipping, which I thought was nice. Considering it's coming from Australia. It's pretty far. And for an extra $2, he'll include a floppy disk. That's kind of a nice touch.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, very exciting stuff.
Definitely exciting, but yeah, just funny. Here I am. I'm away on vacation. I was pretty much remote. Like I had no internet access, no phone. I was pretty much off the grid. And he announces it right then. Not that's a big deal, but here I am. I was waiting. I've been following this blog, and then I come home. I'm like, what?
Yeah, isn't that always the way?
Yeah.
Oh well. Well, at least you can get it now, right?
Exactly. It's good news.
So, well, very good. Well, I think that closes out our news segment for this month. I'm sorry we didn't have that much news, but hopefully you can hopefully you can live with what we've given you.
Hey, you know what? We have to say it's not a bad thing, though.
Yeah, no, it's good to have that much news, especially about such an ancient and revered computer as the CoCo, right? All right. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with some feedback.
There's no place I'd rather be right now than right here with you, listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast.
And now we're back with some feedback. So we'd love to hear from our listeners. It's always good to hear, number one, just to get the strokes or whatever that you guys are out there listening. It's nice to get some guidance once in a while if we're doing something that you like or maybe something that you don't like. It's like I said, the show is for you. If you're not enjoying it, then we're wasting our time. If you are enjoying it, well, we really like to hear that too. So do send us something. Let us know what's going on, and we'd love to hear from you. So this month we've got 3 items we'll talk about here. First one up comes from Steve Strobridge. Forget exactly the context here. I think he's directing this specifically at me. That's hence the singular. But he says, just in case you forgot, you're a fine man doing one hell of a job for our community. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I appreciate the sentiment. I echo it back to you. I'm glad to see you out in the community and doing your videos and keeping some excitement pumping. I hope between your show and our show and whatever other shows are out there, I hope we can pump a lot more activity into the CoCo Fest. And, like I say, maybe we'll have to call the fire marshals this year to or 2017 to shut down the place. But
I would like that. We can hit the maximum capacity of guests.
That would be awesome. Anyway, well, moving on. Thanks. Good to hear from you, Steve. Moving on. This is from, like I said, we just mentioned Bart Vandenacker, aka Retro Guy. He got his article listed on Adafruit. He contacted me separately in referring to our Trash Talk crossover episode where we were surprised to hear about the long white cases, the white cases that are basically CoCo 1 cases, being sold as CoCo 2s over in Australia, whereas in the U.S. they were sold as 64K color computers, or basically CoCo 1s. He says that we had exactly the same in the Netherlands. So apparently this was everything but the U.S. kind of thing. I'm surprised that had never heard of it till now. I guess the white CoCos are just rare enough that that not that much is known about them, even amongst those who have them. I do have one. Sounds like Neil's going to have one soon. Yeah, so I'm kind of wondering now if the ones that, well, I'm wondering all of them. So one of the differences between the CoCo 1 and the CoCo 2 is the lack of the plus and minus 12 volt signals or supplies on the cartridge port. So I'm kind of wondering now if the white CoCos have the plus and minus 12 volts on the cartridge port.
That's a good question.
And I'm wondering now as well, I'm wondering if the U.S. ones have it and if maybe the non-U.S. ones don't have it, or if they're the same or not. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
because they were classified as color computer 2 there.
Well, that's what they're saying, yeah. So
I never knew that either. I was shocked.
Yeah, so I don't know. I should get out my CoCo, my white CoCo, and see if it'll work with the 12 volts. See, I guess the DAC card for my laser scanner needs 12 volts. I should try plugging it in there and see if it works.
Yeah, you have an X-Pad.
An X-Pad. That's true too. But I said laser because it's more fun.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Well, anyway, thanks, Retro Guy, for contacting us, and appreciate the feedback. It's good to know these things. And so, rounding it out, we've got one more budding podcast or budding YouTube celebrity in the CoCo world here. This is from David Ladd, who is Paco Atakte. Yeah, I think I said that right. So David's got a YouTube channel where he's been doing some CoCo YouTube stuff, and he contacts me and says, have you guys thought of maybe doing a video version of your podcast? Talking to me and Neil. So I told him, no, we we really haven't. I don't know. I'm not really eager to do a video podcast. I don't think Neil is. Sometimes it's hard enough to get him to talk anyway.
Yeah, I'm camera shy.
So I don't know. I'm not sure what a video podcast would add to us most of the time. I think some segments, like maybe the gaming segments, could benefit from a video podcast because you can show the gameplay.
Or hardware, like a show and tell.
Yeah, sometimes you could do it hardware, even the tech segments, but you could like point and say, here's the voltage regulator and here's this and that, stuff like that. But I'm not sure how much value you're really adding versus the other changes that would come along with being on video. Now, one thing we have talked about recently, recently the Trash Talk guys did a live episode on the Google Hangouts and had a few people on. I'm not sure if they. I don't know how they rate what happened. If they were happy with the results, or if they were looking for more or less interaction, or what. I haven't really heard them say. But they did have they did some show and tell kind of stuff that they showed some of the collections that Peter Shatinsky had. But anyway, so Neil and I were kind of bouncing off of that. It's like maybe we could do something similar, but I don't think we would do it as a normal podcast episode. I think we might do. We talked about having like a special event, and we could have a round table or something like that, or just invite people in to talk periodically. And we'd be talking about something sort of like the old CoCo coordinated conferences that were done years ago. So that might be something open, and that would be, you could see our lovely faces while we talk. But I don't know. Stay tuned. We'll probably announce something like that in the next couple of months. If nothing else, we'll probably do something around the 6-month vigil waiting for CoCo Fest.
The half a year mark.
Yeah. But anyway, so at this point, I would not plan on the CoCo Crew being on video. The world does not need that. All right. But it is good to have your feedback, David. It's great to hear from you. If anybody else has been thinking about contacting us, please do reach out. If we have any other budding internet celebrities in the group that would like to join the ranks of the YouTubers there, Stevie Stroh or Retro Guy or Paco Atacte, we'd love to hear from you guys. Feel free to contact us, ask us questions, tell us that we've messed up. We'd love to hear from you. Anyway, I think that's all for feedback for this month.
Time for CoCo Fest news. 1980, Tandy publicly unveils the TRS-80 color computer. 1983, Tandy officially announces the Color Computer 2. 1986, Tandy unveils the CoCo 3 at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel. 1990, Tandy says it's curtains for the CoCo. But hold on to your hats, folks. The CoCo outlives Tandy. See for yourself at CoCo Fest in Lombard, Illinois, April 22nd and 23rd, 2017. CoCo Fest. Become part of the equation.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. So, again, as we've been making a habit of for the past several episodes, might as well stop saying we're making a habit of it and just do it every episode. Now it's part of our show formula, I guess. We're going to have a little host discussion. We kind of hemmed and hawed over different topics. We even batted around the idea of an open source discussion, but given the animosity that some parts of the community seem to feel towards open source, I wasn't sure I could do an open source discussion without getting nasty. So,
trouble.
Yeah, well, we don't mind a little bit of excitement in our discussions, but probably don't want to lose listeners over them. So we decided to go with kind of a different direction. And so we've had some other topics in the past. We talked about, printers and who uses them. Why would you ever have one? Which, of course, became one of our most popular recurring topics since then. We had a discussion about floppy disks at one point, I think, and Neil, of course, loves them. Neil is infectious. I've gotten to where I don't dislike them as much as I used to either.
Kind of growing on you?
Yeah, I guess so. But so let's go out one more. What about cassette tapes? Cassettes obviously were something that most of us experienced back in the day. Is our first storage medium, especially those of us who got a CoCo when they were very young, or those of us who maybe didn't have the economic background to support buying a disk drive too early. Yet most people do not remember cassette tapes fondly. And I'm not sure I do either, but lately I've been playing with them some a bit more and have not really had many problems and kind of have enjoyed it. And in the process, I've kind of dug out some programs that are only available on cassette, at least in my collection. And so I wonder, why is that? And why did we dislike cassettes so much? And I don't know. So what do you think, Neil? I can guess without even asking you. I'm just going to guess that you love cassettes, and your only problem is you put them too close to your CRT monitor sometimes.
Yeah, that can be dangerous. I actually, you know what? I don't mind cassettes. I didn't have a tape drive with the CoCo. I was lucky. When I first got my Color Computer 3, which was my first computer, I did get an FD502 floppy drive, as I mentioned on the other host discussion. But what I did for curiosity, I went back to tapes just to see what it was all about. So I went and got the cassette drive cable from Radio Shack and used a tape recorder and checked it out. You know what? I didn't mind it, and I did have some experience with cassettes because on my friend's VIC 20, that all his games were on tape. I mean, other than a couple of cartridges he had for it.
Yeah.
Slow loading times, but it's not that bad.
Well, on the VIC 20, the cassette's better than the disc drive, right?
Yeah, I hear that. I haven't used the disc drive on the VIC 20, but pretty slow.
Yeah, well, so they are slow, obviously, but realistically, nowadays, if I'm going to go to use a CoCo, how fast do I need to be in the process, especially to just play something, right, to consume a game or whatever? If it takes 20 seconds to load, if it takes 2 minutes to load, as long as I don't get so bored that I go off and forget I was loading the game, what difference does it make, right? To quote
That's
Hillary
right.
Clinton. um, and so yeah, I don't know. The thing is that I've not had as much trouble as I remember having in the past, and so I wonder if there's an equipment difference. So lately I've been using a Tandy CCR 82, which those of follow me on Facebook may have seen, where I had this in my collection and determined it wasn't working and disassembled it and found that it had broken belts, which is probably not at all uncommon for cassette tapes, cassette decks of that age, floppy disks of that age for that matter. Nowadays seem to have a lot of broken belts. But so I replaced the belts in there with some kind of generic ones I got in a belt replacement kit off of eBay. And since then, it's been working great. And it loads tapes. In fact, I'm pretty sure this deck is now loading tapes that I had trouble loading on other decks. And I wonder if those decks maybe have slipping belts or something like that that's making them unreliable.
Or if the heads are dirty too, I know that can cause.
And it could be a dirty head, that's true. But I don't know. They load other things, but certain tapes they had trouble with. But yeah, I just have not had a lot of trouble since I've been doing this lately. And I've had a lot of tapes. I got that box of cassette tapes at the CoCo Fest auction. Paid $1 for them or whatever. I think almost every one of them have loaded, and they were just all shoved into a box. And I don't know how they were stored, but I can't imagine they were treated particularly nicely. Everything seems to load. And then, of course, now I'm probably cursing myself that everything will stop loading as of tomorrow. But
Yeah.
but I've got original tapes, with nice stickers on the front. I've got tapes that look like they were recorded over after being used to make mixtapes. I've got everything in between, and they all seem to be working fine. I just wonder, why do we think of this media as being so unreliable? And is it just because it was a lot more of a pain in the butt to deal with when we were using them to save and, restore or reload stuff and having to keep track of where on the tape it was? And, maybe when you record over the stuff, 2 or 3 times, maybe those recordings bleed through.
Yeah.
And so maybe that made them less reliable, whereas these look like they probably were recorded once after being bulk erased or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's part of it. But
that could be, because I know even with audio cassettes, sometimes you'll hear the other song go through.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I don't know. I really have not had much trouble with the cassette loading. I've been having a lot of fun loading programs off a cassette, both on my MC10 and on my CoCo. I actually kind of enjoyed taking apart the cassette deck and replacing those belts too. I enjoyed it so much that I then went and took apart my Famicom disk drive and replaced the belt there too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Of course, that's not CoCo at all, but it's sort of in the same family or same stream of thinking, I guess.
While we're talking about cassettes, the other thing I like about a cassette drive is just the raw simplicity that, you don't have to use a cassette either. Like we were saying before, you can hook a cell phone up, go off the headphone port.
Well, so that interface is really nice, and I think it gets lumped in with the pain in the ass of cassettes from back in the day. But the interface itself is pretty nice that it's sitting there, and with that audio cable, like I say, you can plug it in your cell phone or MP3 player or whatever, play back the recording, and it just loads right into your CoCo with nothing else plugged in. So if you just got a CoCo off of eBay or just out of the thrift shop, or all you have is a CoCo hooked up, and you don't want to have to drag out a monitor and a disk drive, and even a CoCo SDC or whatever. There's an expense to acquiring it. It's not that much, but you got to be serious enough about wanting it that you have to do it, right? It's just a little bit simpler to load a WAV file, especially, that's how I got back in the hobby back in the day. Is there was one game I wanted to play. Now, granted, that was Robot Odyssey. It was a disc-based game. But what if the one game you wanted to play was Zaxxon or Puyan or something else that was available on a cassette? All you would really need is your cassette tape, or cassette player, and a cable, and your CoCo. The WAV file on your phone, and a cable and a CoCo, and that's all you'd need to be able to set up and play Puyan or
that's right.
Whatever else was available on cassette, and there were some decent games available on cassette. I mean, Lancer, that's a Joust clone, is available. There are things out there that are worth playing.
The other cool thing with cassettes is it's another physical piece of media. You get a nice case with a little paper inlet.
It is nice. I enjoy some of the cassettes that I have. Like you said, some of them have nice paper inlays or whatever the term is, and they can have the instructions on there. It's a physical thing. It's kind of like having a cartridge. It probably won't last as long as the cartridge, but still, it's kind of nice. They certainly have lasted longer than anybody would have thought they needed them to, right? I mean,
amazing.
You have cassettes that were made in 1983. You pop them in and they work. I've got tapes. I've got audio tapes certainly that are older than that I still play them.
Still sound good.
And still sound pretty good. I can only imagine if they had data on them, they'd probably still be legible to a computer. So
true.
I don't know if they'll last forever. I'm sure they won't. But they'll probably last longer than I need them to. Now that said, if you've got prize cassettes laying around with CoCo data on them, find a way to get it off immediately. Preserve it for posterity.
Yeah, that's a rare program.
Yeah, but you may not have to. Let's put it that way. Well, anyway, what do you think? Have we beat this to death, or is there more to discuss?
I wonder what it is. You were saying, to load a program, it's roughly 2 minutes.
It depends, but yeah.
Yeah, it depends on how big the how much data it is. But it seems to be everybody, when you talk to them about tape drives, they always say that they're so slow.
Yeah,
but I don't really find them that slow. I mean, maybe because now we're retro computing, it's a different time now, and we're more patient. But
it depends. I mean, comparing even to a floppy disk, they were a lot slower, or at least on the CoCo, maybe not on the Commodores, or the Ataris. They were slower, but again, I'm not sure it makes much difference. When I was 12, it mattered every second, I guess. But
I think maybe that's just it, right?
Yeah. So now that I'm 40 something, it matters a lot less. If I'm sitting down to play Flipside, I'm not really caring if it takes 2 minutes or 5 or whatever. You know what I mean? It's
right.
So
I hooked up. Speaking of tape drives, I hooked one up just a little while ago. A friend of mine, he never saw one. He's younger than me.
Yeah.
He goes, I'd love to see a tape drive load a program. I said, yeah, no problem. So I hooked up the CCR 82 and I loaded one of those cartoon. It's a Cartoon Workshop,
Children's Computer Workshop.
That's it. The educational one, and it was actually a pretty good game.
Yep. Yeah. So I looked in the catalog on there, and I do have 10 of those titles from them, and that's how many were in the catalog, at least in '85.
You get the whole collection.
So I think I've got the whole collection.
Awesome.
Pretty cool. So I don't know. I think the cassette is perhaps unfairly maligned in terms of the retro storage thing. Like I said, I don't advocate using an actual cassette for new storage unless you're just trying to be kind of a retro cheeky kind of person. But
yeah, you never know. We can start doing some cassette publishing here.
Yeah, well, we could. I wouldn't be opposed to it. My son would love it. My son, the junior retro nerd of the house, he's in love with any kind of old media storage now. It's like we were out at a thrift store somewhere and found like a 6-pack of cassette tapes, like for making mixtapes, unrecorded, wrapped in cellophane from like 1986 or something.
Awesome.
And he was quite excited when I bought those for him. But yeah,
didn't we pick up a pack for him when I was down in your area too?
Maybe so. That may have been the same time, but he grudgingly let me have one of those to record to save Famicom Family Basic type-ins on. So pretty funny.
Awesome.
Well, anyway, is there anything more here, or?
I think that's about it. But I definitely like to hear what our listeners have to say.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like I said, I know the cassettes are much maligned in people's memories. I wonder how much of that is truly fair, how much of that is somewhat amplified because of some things that could be extra painful that may have bitten us at one time or another, but in retrospect maybe aren't that much worse than the things that discs could do to us or whatever. And like I say, if you're recording over your tapes sloppily, you can't be too surprised if you read back garbage, right? But if you're properly erasing the tapes and taking good care of them, not recording them over to the point where you could see through the plastic, then maybe they really weren't such a bad storage device. They were a little slow, but not. I mean, how much faster could they be? You're talking about a 1 megahertz machine, right? And then a 0.79 or 0.89 kilo or megahertz.
Yeah.
1.78 if you really want to push it, right? And don't overlook the interface itself, because it's pretty handy if you just want to carry your cell phone in a CoCo. You don't have to. You can package it up like it's going on a cassette, but just put it on your cell phone, and you can do some cool stuff demo wise or whatever, however you want to use your CoCo. But it's a pretty good way to go. So, but like Dale says, I'm sure there'll be somebody out there who disagrees with us. Some may disagree very strongly, some less so. Some of you may agree. Either way, we'd love to hear from you, whatever your story is. Feel free to write it up or send us an email, contact us on Facebook, Twitter, wherever, or get on your computer and get a microphone and record us some audio and send it in. We would love to have that as well. All right. Thanks, Neil.
Sounds good. That was a good discussion there.
Yeah, good talk, I think.
Maybe next month we'll discuss having media on vinyl records.
Yeah, I might have to try that too. All right, well, let's move. Shimmy, shimmy, Coco Pop, shimmy, shimmy, pop. Shimmy, shimmy, Coco Pop, shimmy, shimmy, bop. Whoa. 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 All right. Excuse me. All right, welcome, CoCo Cruisers. This is John Linville coming to you from the CoCo Crew headquarters compound, southeast, in the Piedmont area of North Carolina, and I'm here to talk about a technical topic. And the technical topic for this month will be on using a receipt printer with the CoCo or an MC10. This talk will be based on a blog post I made this week. The link will be in the show notes. So if anything gets a little too deep for merely audio reception, then you may want to go off and read the blog post as well. So anyway, what are we talking about? What is a receipt printer? Well, so a receipt printer is exactly what it says. When you go to the store and you exchange cash for something and you hand you back a little piece of paper that describes the transaction called a receipt. Those the little printer that produced that is what we're talking about. If you notice, most of those, of course, they tend to print on a roll of paper a few inches wide, several centimeters wide for our Canadian friends. They tend to use a thermal print head, and so what that means is the paper that they're printing on is treated with a chemical that makes it sensitive to heat, and so the print head actually exposes pieces of the paper to heat and causes bits of it to turn black, and that's how the printing is done. And so, if you notice, I think probably many of us have noticed from time to time that these printers often have what appears to be a serial port connection in the back, or it depends. Some of them will have a kind of a more standard PC style serial port on them, and some of the newer ones now have USB connections as well, but you can still find a number of them that have serial port connections either in the wild or of course on eBay, which is where I acquired mine. And so if you want to look around for a printer for your CoCo and pick one of these up, I think it's a decent idea. So if you do that, how do you make it work with the CoCo? Well, it's not quite as simple as just hooking it up, but we do have to start with that. So the CoCo printer ports, or serial port, actually you'll notice only has 4 pins, whereas even the serial printer connections, the serial connections on PCs have at least 9 or even 25 pins. So you got to figure we're probably having to give something up or at least rearrange things a bit. So those 4 pins on the CoCo, they actually are software defined. They hook up to the PIA inside the CoCo. And so it's sort of up to the CoCo to define how they're used or what they're doing. But it turns out that they actually have extra hardware connected to them inside the CoCo that deals with shifting voltage levels to match between what RS-232 expects and what the PIA expects inside the CoCo. And so that means that you have one pin on the 4-pin serial connection that is a ground pin, so which kind of establishes shared values for voltages between both ends of the connection. It's a reference point for those. And then so there's one pin that does the level shifting in an outward direction, so that's used for transmitting data on the serial port. And then there's 2 pins that are used for the level shifting in the other direction, so they can be used for receiving either status or data. And so the default definition that's used for modems, for example, has so pin 4 is for transmit, pin 3 is for ground, pin 2 is for receiving data, and pin 1 is depends on where you see it, it'll be marked either status input, or quite often it's marked CD for carrier detect, which basically just tells the CoCo that your modem's ready for data transfer. But when you use the cable for a printer, those pins get redefined a little bit. I'm not sure why they did this, because all they really wanting is the printer to be able to send a ready signal back to the CoCo. So I would have thought that would have mapped back to the status input, so basically use the CD line on the serial cable for the printer. But that's not what they did, and I guess since you don't really need a receive data line from the printer, when they were developing the printer routines, they just used the receive line as the ready line from the printer, and so it kind of messes things up a little bit. So you'll see when you have a vintage serial cable for the CoCo or MC10, you'll notice that they are designated as either modem cables or printer cables. And this is why, because the printer routines in the CoCo treat the serial port pins differently than the ones related to serial output. And I know it seems a little crazy, but that's what they did. So beware, if you're using a pre-made cable, it needs to be a printer cable. If you're making your own cable, you need to make it where the ready line from the printer goes to pin 2 on the serial cable instead of pin 1, which, like I said, would seem like the obvious choice to me, but that's not what they did. So anyway, again, if you may want to refer back to the blog post. There's a link out to another page that describes some of that. So there's the wiring. That's the kind of the first major step in getting the machines to talk to each other. But then, as anybody who's ever done much serial port interfacing knows, you also need to agree on some other parameters of the communication, which sort of actually defines, what actual signals are being used, and sort of in terms of the timing of the different signals. So by default, the CoCo is going to operate its printer port at 600 baud. So it's basically 600 bits per second. It will look for the printer to generate a busy output when it's not ready. That's probably not, strictly speaking, a necessity, it'd be my guess. But the main thing is the data format that it's going to use. It's going to use one start bit. It says 7 data bits and 2 stop bits with no parity. And I think maybe some of the ROMs actually... it says that's for the revision 1.0 ROMs for Color Basic, and it looks like the 1.1 ROMs changed that to 8 data bits, and I'm not sure if they actually changed that from 2 stop bits to 1, which would be pretty normal. It doesn't say that in the reference manual, but that's what we're using is 8N1 to communicate. So I'm assuming that works. It may be that it's just working out because of the slow rate of communication anyway. But so anyway, so you have this like I said, let's go with 8N1 because probably most people have the 1.1 ROMs, but it might be 8N2 for 8 bits no parity, and it could be 2 stop bits, but I think it's probably 1 stop bit, and certainly that's what I'm using is the 1 stop bit. So anyway, explaining exactly what those means is probably beyond the scope of this recording, but if you know much about serial port interfacing, you should probably be able to read that, and if not, you can just sort of take it as something that you need to look at. Your printer is going to need to be configured compatibly on those in terms of the communications parameters. On the Epson one that I have, those are set with dip switches on the bottom of the device. Probably would be done similarly on any other device. But you need to set them to a set of settings that is compatible. And like I said, in terms of stop bits and data bits and parity bits, unless you've had the printer in a weird application, it's probably already set to something that's going to halfway work. So the biggest thing is setting the baud rate. So in my case, I couldn't get my baud rate on the printer to go any lower than 4800 baud. But that's okay. It's a rate that the CoCo appears to be happy with, but you have to poke in a different value at I guess it's a location 150 in the RAM of the CoCo, and there's different values for different locations, and you have to Google around for it. There are some listed in the technical reference manual. It looks like those only go up to 2400 baud. Pretty sure I'm using 4800 baud. I'm not sure exactly where I found the baud rate, but you can find it out there. If you're looking for it and can't find it, then send some feedback to the CoCo Crew or to me directly, and I'll help you out. And it probably doesn't go much higher than about 9600 baud, but hopefully that'll be good enough. So anyway, once you get your baud rate set and your wiring connected, you can try printing using LList on either the MC10 or the CoCo, LPrint on the MC10, or on the CoCo it would be print #-2, meaning to print to device -2. You'll be able to get some output. You should notice you'll probably hear the mechanism move a little bit when you print, but it might not actually advance, and that's in fact it probably won't unless you happen to print a line feed character. By default, the CoCo doesn't print line feed characters at the ends of lines. It uses a carriage return at the end of the line. Again, this is a discussion that's probably outside the scope of this recording, but for whatever reason, there's historically was some confusion over how to indicate the end of a line in ASCII encoded data, and so you had some that use carriage returns, some that use line feeds, some that use both. You just find all of it, but the CoCo uses carriage returns, and the printer's insisting on line feeds. So what do you do about that? Well, so one way or another, you need to make the CoCo or the MC10 add a line feed when it's outputting a carriage return. So it's like, how are you going to do that without rewriting the ROMs, right? Because the basic language interpreter is in ROM on those machines. So you're stuck, right? Well, no. It turns out that the people writing these ROMs were kind of smart enough to figure out that people might want to make these sorts of changes from time to time, and they were smart enough to kind of leave an escape hatch in there in a number of places. And so in different commands, they have what are called RAM hooks. And so basically, certain places in the ROM code, they'll jump to a location in RAM, and if it's not being hooked, it will have preceded those locations with the return instruction. So you just jump out there and return. But if you are aware of what that's about, you can go into those locations and have them jump somewhere else, and then your code can kind of modify the behavior of the color basic ROMs. And so if you're knowledgeable of how these things are happening, you can hook the RAM hook and then go off and do whatever else. And so you could add different commands, you could add different behaviors to some commands. You could embed secret instructions in the data you're passing to certain commands, and you can do lots of crazy stuff. And there's probably a bunch of magazine articles that have been written over it in the Rainbow or other CoCo magazines, and similar things in other magazines for other 8-bit computers of the time, because they all sort of did this sort of thing. But in our case, all we really want to do is add a line feed when we print a carriage return. And so the first step is we need a little bit of code to do that. And so if you read the blog post, I've got some assembly code examples for both. There's a CoCo version and an MC10 version. They're pretty similar. The MC10 one's a little bit simpler because the way the code is written, by the time you get down to the hook, you're either only putting out either to the screen or to the printer, so you really only have to check for a 0 value or not. On the CoCo version, you have to check for you might be outputting to the cassette or to another device or another file or whatever. So, but they basically do the same things. They check to make sure you're outputting to the printer. They check that the character you're outputting is a carriage return. If neither of those are true, they just return, which is what the RAM hook would have done originally. In the cases where you are putting out a carriage return, they jump into the ROM code. They do a JSR there to actually into the ROM code for outputting to the printer. So they go ahead and print out that carriage return. And then it returns back to the RAM hook because you did a jump to subroutine. And so then you actually modify the register that contains the next character to be output and replace the carriage return with a line feed, and then return from the RAM hook. But so then the RAM hook actually ends up going back, and then it follows down and executes again the code to output a character to the printer. But now instead of that being a carriage return, which you've already sent, it's now a line feed. And so you end up sending the carriage return and the line feed together. And so as long as you get that code to run every time you output with a printer, then you're saved, right? Your printer will work fine. But how do you get that to happen? And so a little bit later down in the blog post, you'll see I've got a couple of examples in BASIC of how you hook the code in BASIC. You have to do a couple of simple steps, and the main thing is you want to reserve a little code, a little memory for your code outside of where BASIC expects to be able to control memory. and that's done with the clear command. And in my basic code, I've gotten a little trickier than that. Whereas you could clear at a specific range, but then you have to know in advance how much memory is available on the CoCo and whether you've done this trick with some other piece of code and that sort of thing. So actually, ended up querying the state of BASIC's variables to find out what's the top of RAM that BASIC is aware of already. And then I do a clear just below that, so I just enough space for the assembly language program to live. And so I just move the top of BASIC down a little bit, and so it's done with reference to where it already is, rather than going to a specific address in advance. So you don't have to know how much memory was in use or is available on the machine. It just goes based on whatever you're already using, right? I think that's a little more flexible, and it seemed nicer to me. But anyway, so you clear that, and then let's see, I've got it to where so once you do the clear, there's a trick there, is that clear kind of wipes out all your existing variables. So you'll see in the basic programs where you kind of do the same thing around line 50 that you did around line 10. That's because the variable you assigned at line 10 is now gone after the clear command, and so you have to kind of recreate it. But once I've done that, I do a little setup for the printer, changing the baud rate and sending a printer reset command to the printer. And then I do a for loop with a read from data and a poke, which you should probably be familiar with from the Rainbow days of seeing them poke assembly language into memory from BASIC. Nothing really fancy here. You just, it's a for loop with a read and a poke, and it's poking into the memory locations that we reserved earlier, just past the end of the clear statement. And so then once you get done with that loop, the assembly language program is in memory and it's protected from BASIC overwriting it, so that's nice. And so then the last step is actually inserting the hook. And so each of these RAM hooks is 3 RAM locations, which basically is a jump instruction and an address to jump to. And so again, I take the address that we calculated that's just beyond the end of where BASIC's using, and where we just poked our program to, and I do a little math to find the in 2 individual bytes of that, and I poke them out to memory, and then I poke the address first, so in code it literally would still say return followed by an address, which is meaningless except for the return to the processor. And so the last step is to change the return to a jump location or a jump instruction. So then you jump to the subroutine and return. And it's not necessarily you jump to the subroutine, but it's not a jump to subroutine instruction. It's a jump. So that then you just return from the assembly language program, and it returns all the way back to the ROM call, not to the RAM hook. Again, that's a little bit technical, but just hear that I do the jump. I modify the return to a jump, and that takes care of it. And that's the magic. Okay, so once you've got all that in place, then that's it. You just use normal basic print commands. You don't have to worry about the line feed thing when you're actually using BASIC. It just takes care of it. And so now your modern day receipt printer is effectively a CoCo printer, and you just use it. You just you can print number -2, whatever. You can list and whatever. If you get the manual for the Epson codes to send to the printer, you can send them all to the printer using BASIC and do cool things, graphics, barcodes. You can even send the command that has it cut the printer, cut the tape, so that you can have individual receipts, and it all should work. So again, I did a blog post with the actual examples. There's a little bit more wording on the coding involved. I understand some listeners may not be quite as interested in those level of technical details. Hopefully you've stuck with me, but do check out the blog post if you're interested in a little more technical detail, and feel free to contact me if you have questions. And so, beyond that, happy cocoing, and I hope you've enjoyed this segment, and we'll get you back to the CoCo Crew. All right? CoCo forever. Thanks.
Don't rewind the tape.
I'm sorry, I had the turntable at the wrong speed. You want to try it again?
1, 2, 3, 4. I lose control cause I'm cuckoo for you. Cuckoo for you. I'm cuckoo. Yahoo! I'm cuckoo for you.
Okay, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. This is John again. Going to do, again, something a little different with me giving you a bit of a game review. This game is, game we're going to talk about is Flipside. And this is one of a collection of programs that were done for the color computer by the Children's Computer Workshop, which, if the name sounds somewhat familiar, it's pretty clearly related to the Children's Television Workshop, which of course was where we get Big Bird and Bert and Ernie and all those kind of guys. And a number of the games in that series do involve characters like Cookie Monster or Ernie or that sort of stuff. But some of the later programs in the series are for kids a little older. The other programs are like ages 6 and 7, that sort of stuff. So the other ones, the later ones are around ages 10 and older, they say. And that's probably, well, it might be a little low in some ways, or it might be just a matter of kind of how much interest they're sort of capable of showing or whatever. But anyway, I thought it might be fun. These programs are all very well done. I happen to have a collection of 8 of them, which I think is the complete set. They're all on cassette. A lot of people eschew cassettes. I used to as well. I don't know if it's just that my collection got more or less complete for the non-cassette stuff, or if somehow I got contaminated by Neil or what. But I've been taking a little more interest in cassette-based stuff over the past year or so. And at CoCo Fest, I managed to get a box full of CoCo cassettes, some of which were, shall we say, archival copies of a variety of things. But these Children's Computer Workshop ones were all original cassettes. Nicely decorated labels, and with the manuals, and very nice shaped manuals. It's a cardboard cover, so the page size is, it's folded in half of an 8x10 basically, so about the size of a pamphlet you'd get it as your church program or something like that. And so, anyway, they're all pretty well done. They have nice loaders. They load up a basic program with C-load to start them, so that at least is familiar. But when you run them, you need to leave the play down on the cassette, because it takes advantage of the feature of the cassette recorder where the CoCo can control when it's playing or not. And it continues to load stuff, and they all load up like a title screen, and they'll show a graphic and play a little song or something. With Flipside, they show a logo that says like Flipside that is like blue on white, and then it flips to white on blue. It plays a little song or whatever, but then it comes up to, and it's got a text screen here I'm looking at right now. Welcome to Flipside. There are many ways to play this game. In all of them, your goal is to make the board change color. And this says, but first you have to choose your rules. Press enter to go on. So anyway, this is Flipside. When I looked at the manual, I actually thought it was going to be like a reversey style of game, or Othello or something. But it kind of gives you a hint right there at the first screen. But first you have to choose your rules. And so, well, what does that mean, right? And so if you press enter, it will. It runs the tape a little more. well, maybe we'll stick to the menu for a moment. But okay, well, no, it does bring it up pretty quick. Making your moves. Use your joystick to move your player around the board. Press the red action button to flip a piece to your color. Press enter to see the screen flip. And now press clear to see the rules screen. We'll go ahead and press clear to get to the rules screen. But so here we have a screen, so you can pick how many players that you can have, and you can have either 1 or 2 players. And then it has a couple of things. There's a number of flips per player, and which default is 6, and then the number of flips for the screen. So what does that mean? And then default is 1. And then on the right side, there's a table that says surround rules, and it has a number 0 through 8, and those numbers represent the combination of sides and corners of the square. And so for each of 0 through 8, it has an action which can be unflip, no change, or flip. And so if you're familiar with Cellular Automata or Conway's Game of Life, you might be starting to see what I see. And that this game is not reversey at all. What it really is a version of Conway's Game of Life. And so what it is when you start the game, it presents a screen to you, and as the one player, you can move around the screen, and you can press a button on a space, and it'll turn to your player's color, and you can do that a certain number of times, which by default it was 6. And yeah, so I'm just putting a few on here. Alright, so there's 6. I've got them down there. And so now I want to play to flip the screen or whatever. Press enter again. And so I press enter, and some of the screen, blocks on the screen change color. Some that were blue become white, which is the background color, and then some that were white become blue. And so, well, what does that mean? Right, so what is this? Well, if you can hit enter a number of times, and each time you print one, unfortunately I misplaced those, so they're already down to no blocks. I'm going to back out a little bit, and if I change it to, there's a setting for the screen flips that it can go all the way up to 10 flips, and then there's a plus, which basically means just keep going. And so from there, you can place your blocks, and you can set it to keep going, and you can see that the blocks will kind of move around, and depending on how the rules are set and where you placed your blocks, you can get motion on the screen, and you get this interaction. And so that's what the Game of Life is all about, is you're kind of simulating life, as like how life propagates or whatever. And so what this is a big Game of Life kind of setup, and you can manipulate the rules, and you can set up different structures and see how they propagate across the screen or whatever. And then as a 2-player mode, so you can have both players doing that, and so they can sort of compete with one another. And so when you get down, get to the last page of the manual, or last couple of pages, it talks about some activities, and it talks about different ways to change the rules. And then it shows you one particular shape, which if you enter and then let the screen run, it will move across the screen, and they've called a creeper or whatever. And so the Game of Life is, people that are into Conway's Game of Life know about these kind of shapes that will do kind of different behavioral things. You can make them interact with each other. You can have them move across the screen. You can have them build squares or whatever. And like you say, you can change some of the rules around. The idea is that when you put a life on the planet or whatever, for life to continue, it needs to be surrounded by a certain amount of other life but not choked out by the other life. And so that's what the rules are about, is like, well, if you have a neighbor, or maybe 2 neighbors, that's enough for you to stay alive. If you have 3 neighbors, maybe that's enough for you to propagate. But if you have 4 neighbors, you're going to get choked out, so you'll die. Anyway, if we'll put a link in the show notes to Conway's Game of Life so you can get maybe a better description. I think I saw somebody asking about Game of Life on the CoCo list this month, and having just come across this Flipside and playing it and coming to the realization that that's what Flipside is an implementation of Conway's Game of Life, kind of turned into a game that's accessible to people. Normally, the Game of Life is like a computer science project that you'll program yourself, and you'll have to come up with your own ways to enter the data and whatever else, and it's just a programming exercise. It's not that much fun. Well, some people love it, but for me, I didn't think it was that much fun. But this is already made into a game for you, and it'll keep score for you. It'll count the number of blocks you have. If you want to have 2 players, it'll count the number of blocks they have left. Like I said, you can change the rules and experiment with how the different rules affect the survival of different kinds of layouts. Like you said, you can run the rules back. You can run them one at a time, so you can slowly observe the changes, or you can run them in a few steps of sequence, or you can just let them run all the way out. But yeah, so I don't think I've ever really seen a Game of Life turned into a real game, at least not in anything resembling a marketable product. So I'm pretty impressed by that. Yeah, it's just kind of a fun thing, and it's kind of neat. This is, like I said, this is Flipside by the Children's Computer Workshop, which does say on here, an activity of Children's Television Workshop. This is one of a number of games produced for the color computer by the Children's Computer Workshop, and they're all pretty high quality. They, of course, are educational games, are slanted towards education. Playing as an adult, I probably would stick to the ones targeted for older ages, like Robot and Flipside. There's another one that's time-bound, I think. But even the children's games were, kind of fun to play with. Maybe we'll revisit them at some point in the future. I don't know how often Neil will let me horn in on his game thing, but we'll see. So if you are the kind of CoCo person that wants to be able to demonstrate gaming in the good old days, especially to children, or if you're just trying to get children interested in the CoCo down in your basement. That sounds a little creepy, but if you are trying to get children interested in the CoCo, maybe you should pick up some of these games that are targeted for children by people who clearly know what they're doing, or did know what they're doing, or what they were doing. I don't know, talking in the past now, I guess, but clearly the Children's Television Workshop, Children's Computer Workshop, people, they know children, they know how to educate. They've had a good thing going with Big Bird for a number of decades. So even 20 years ago, they knew computers and kids pretty well, I think. So this might be a good ticket in to get your grandkids or your young children interested in the CoCo at a relatively early age. And like I said, the Flipside and Robot and Timebound are not too bad, even for children of all ages, shall we say. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that overview. If you are looking for a gamified version of Conway's Game of Life, then the Flipside is probably your best bet, or at least the best bet I've ever seen. I hope you'll check it out. I hope you've enjoyed this segment, and I hope you're playing with your CoCo. All right, well, thanks, and CoCo forever.
CoCo Corina, CoCo Corina, CoCo Corina, CoCo Corina.
Well, I don't know. Karina must be a very special girl if she has the name CoCo in front of it. That's all I have to say. Well, once again, we have reached the end of the podcast. This is about the time you start scrambling and figuring out what are you going to do while waiting for another month for episode 16 to air. Well, I'm sure if you really get bored, you can always take up one of the project ideas we mentioned in the newsfeed. A big thank you goes to our host, John Linville, for providing not only a fantastic tech segment on interfacing a receipt printer to the CoCo and MC10, but also filling in for my job by doing a game review on Flipside this month. And my golly, what a coincidence that game review was, with Aaron Wolf just asking for the game of life. Funny how these things work out like that sometimes. Now, just before I say goodbye and roll the Farfall theme song, I have a surprise. As a bonus in this episode 15, we are giving away 3 copies of the original gamer Stevie Stroh's CoCo Fest DVD. In case you don't know who Stevie Stroh is, well, first of all, he's a cocoa nut, I'm sure you guessed that, and also a YouTube star who runs his own video game review website. He not only has reviewed like 1 million CoCo games, but he also reviews other games on different platforms. I highly recommend you go check his webpage out at www.ogsteviestroh.com. That's OGSTEVIESTROW.com. Stevie created this DVD as a special commemorative piece of merchandise exclusively for the 25th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. It was sold at last year's CoCo Fest, and it contains over 20 CoCo video game reviews, including some special guests such as our very own John Linville. Now you're asking, how can I get this DVD? Well, it's simple. In episode 14, I made an error in mentioning something. Send an email to me, Neil, at cococrew.org. That's NEIL at COCOCREW.org, and tell me what my error was. The first 3 emails with the correct answer will get a copy of this DVD. Here, I will give you one hint. It's something I mentioned that didn't happen in this episode. Well, as always, we'd like to thank you for listening and your support. Also appreciate your feedback, as it's great to hear from you. Until next month, CoCo forever.